We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to another edition of AV Rant. I'm Tom Antry, and I'm here with
Rob H. This is AV Rant. It's your home theater and AV questions answered. We're back once again with Tom as a logo on YouTube. If you're happening to watch that version, it's going to be that way for a while, just like it was for me when I went through my flood. And I didn't put this in the news because nothing is official at this point. We're recording this on a Tuesday morning, but happy to hear that the Writers Guild of America and the producers have reached at least a tentative agreement, just meaning that they have to fill out all the legal language and then actually put it to a vote. Like I say, nothing official yet, but at least it sounds like there's some progress being made, if nothing else. So very happy to hear about that, and hopefully the writers will get something that they find suitable and in place for them, and then the actors can follow quickly after. That's what I'm hoping.
5 seconds of news I heard on this was like they thought it was an exceptional deal.
I mean, that's what the language of the bargaining committee for the writers said. I mean, I hope that's true. I hope it's basically everything they're asking for. That
it's so easy to judge. And my wife and I were talking about this week, about how much we like to judge as a species, how much we like to feel superior to others.
Okay.
And judge others. Like, no matter what hobby, like we're in the AV industry, right? We walk into somebody's house and we look at their speakers, we're like, pah, pah. Look at how they have their TV set up. Look, it's above the fireplace. Oh my God, the speakers, the sound bar,
the motion smoothing mostly,
the subwoofer. The automatic in-room light adjustment setting on the TV is on. I mean, like, so many. We love to feel superior to others, and one of the ways I see this play out in this, what we're talking about with the writer strike, is how come they feel like they should get paid more? I don't know. How come you feel like they shouldn't? What's so great about you that you understand what they go through and what they do and stuff?
Well, also just
how much they get paid.
The growing chasm between the people making the most money, which are the producers, and the studio executives and the shareholders.
It is very hard to feel bad for people that are that rich. And I am not one to, and again, I'm not on the other side of it either, where I'm like, oh, you have too much money, we should take some of it from you. I don't know how you got that money. I don't know what you did to deserve it or not deserve it. I don't know, and it's not my place to say. But at the same time, the garbage workers are going on strike. How dare they? Now my garbage is everywhere. Like, listen, man, if you don't want to do it, or if you can't do it, then you are not allowed to have an opinion on how much it costs to have it done. Because either it's so expensive that you're like, I'm just going to figure this out for myself, or it's so hard that you're like, I can't, and I will pay you
or
anything
I just don't want
to do this for. So as we've talked about, I think I talked about mostly on DJ's podcast about the fact that I part-time work at a bike shop now, just to kind of basically subsidize my
supplements,
cycling addiction.
That's right,
because it is an expensive hobby. There are two kind of customers that come in. One customer comes in and has absolutely no idea what we do, and does not appreciate it one bit. Thinks no matter what we charge, it's too much.
Sure.
Right? And then there's the guy who tried, or the gal, who tried to do it themselves, and they will throw, they don't care how much you charge. I had one guy come in with his kids' bikes. He had 2 kids' bikes, and he's like, I told him that he had assembled them himself. He did not tell me this, but I figured it out after I worked on it. One of his kids had crashed pretty seriously because that bike was jacked up. But he clearly put them together poorly, not because he's a bad person or whatever, he didn't follow the directions. It's because they tell you it's going to be easy. And in the directions they say, put the front wheel on, adjust the brake, you're good to go. Believe me, you are not good to go. You are in no way good to go when that happens. So he brought these bikes in, and he just, I swear he almost just like punted them through the front door and said, fix it. I don't care what it costs. I'm out.
Might it not have cost less in some cases to buy a whole new kid's bike? I would think in some instances.
It wasn't quite that bad.
Okay, not quite that bad. All right.
It was you could see what had happened based on the damage to the bike, and it wasn't like serious damage. I mean, it was itty bitty bike. He couldn't make, he wasn't going that fast.
Yeah.
But when you, I think that plumbing is where most of us experience this.
Okay.
Like everybody thinks plumbing is too expensive. Like I haven't met anybody that thought that a plumber wasn't raking them over the coals. You know what? You know what's the worst part of doing a job? When someone else tries to do it first and they don't know what they're doing and they make it 10 times worse.
Absolutely.
And that's why, and one of my things, that's why I think plumbers are like, this is 5 times as much because it's taken me 5 times as long to undo everything that you did. Because we all think, oh my God, I don't want to call the plumber, I'll try it myself. I have tried it myself numerous times, and it is very much like playing the lottery.
Okay.
I sometimes accidentally get it right, and my wife was complaining the other day about the fact that our toilet in our master bathroom doesn't flush all that well. And she's like, "Oh, we got to get a new one." I'm like, "We don't need to get a new one. We need to get somebody to adjust it because I put the innards of that thing in there." And right when I was getting it all set up, something moved, and I went, "Oh God." And when it moved, I was like, well, I got 2 choices here. It's not leaking, and it's mostly flushing pretty good. Or I can try to take the whole thing apart and start over again. I was like, I'm definitely not doing that second one. So, it's just harder than you think it is. And so you get the plumber in there, and he's like, oh, man, you cracked this, or you broke that, and now you got to change this, and everything else. Everything's 10 times more expensive. I completely appreciate all of these people. So when the writers are like, I'm not getting paid enough, you know what I think? I think they're probably not getting paid enough.
The major thing that was very clear and obvious is that, this is an oversimplification, but it's pretty apt, which is that they were trying to change being a Hollywood writer from a career to a gig. It was becoming a gig thing. Well, we hire you for 1 day, we hire you for 3 weeks, and then that's it.
It was the whole streaming thing too, where we talked about this with Black Widow when Scarlett Johansson sued him. Everyone was like, well, how dare she sue? She was suing because of this exact reason, because they were trying to change how things work because it's a new thing and there's no rules on the books.
Yeah, that was a little different because hers was purely it just didn't exist in the contract that was signed, and they tried to get away with not paying the back end because it didn't go into theaters. So that was a little different than this, but along similar lines of just trying to set some ground rules for new things that we can see coming down the pike, or the writers can see that it's coming down the pike, and they're like, oh well, if we just leave it alone, maybe we'll be able to get away with paying less for people doing the work. So yeah, anyway, going back to the whole thing, just happy to hear that there's any progress being made. If the bargaining committee is happy with what is on the table, that is a very good sign, if nothing else. Maybe it doesn't pass the first vote, but at least there's this is better. This is better than there's no talking going on and we're cutting down the trees that are providing some shade in the horrible heat. This is better than that.
Well, it's starting to cool down over there, so now they're like, oh, I got it. They'll really stick it out if we don't do something.
Some of the producers tried using ChatGPT and were like, oh, this isn't quite ready yet. Maybe we actually do need writers for another 3 years.
Oh, my God. So there's an article in AV Gadgets that came out in the last week or so that Andrew wrote because he was doing some research on his own about home theater remotes, just trying to come up to see what else is out there.
Yep.
And he found an article that was the 7 best new universal remotes for home theater, blah, 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 right? 2023.
Okay.
And the entire article was Harmony remotes.
Yeah.
The entire article was. And there was no mention in the article at all that
it's been discontinued.
These things are all discontinued. That there's no mention that you can't buy them new. There's no mention of any of that. For most, at least the hub-based ones, you can't buy them new. I don't think they're making any of the other ones. Maybe they are. I don't know. Anyways, the point being, this was all AI generated. This was an AI generated article that they had just slapped up there.
Google is becoming more and more useless because just the number of junk websites that have really optimized their search engine optimization, they've gone whole hog on that side. Maybe AI helped them with that. And then it's just auto-generated garbage content. And all of that stuff is rising to the top of the Google results. It is getting difficult to use and, remain useful and efficient.
Yeah, it's funny too because as somebody who has a modicum of knowledge, and I'm talking about a modicum, like you don't have to have that much knowledge to read those articles and go, well, this doesn't ring true to me. This is not right.
Yeah.
And then if you have as much knowledge as most of the people who listen to this podcast, they're like, well, that's all crap.
Yeah.
Like that's complete. But we are the minority.
Mm-hmm.
There are people out there just like me in plumbing, just like me in electricity or me in, tile work or anything like that. Or yard work too, for that matter. I search for something. I have a zero base of knowledge in that. I have very, very little, like just a hair's breadth of knowledge. So anything I read, I'm going to believe because I've got nothing else, right? So if you were looking for a universal remote for the very first time and that article came up,
right, yeah.
you would be very confused.
You'll quickly discover you can't
That's
find them
true.
available to purchase new anywhere. So.
But then you end up going back. You're like, I don't know what to believe anymore.
Not that website. That's for sure. That's one clue.
So, anyways,
let's get going.
Let's talk about. Let's move on. But yes, the news we don't know yet. Blah blah blah. Well, what did you watch, Rob? What did you watch?
Okay, so I'm pretty simple. I finished up Star Wars Rebels.
Almost done with season 1. I think.
Okay, all right.
I
think my final evaluation. I didn't keep track of here are the exact episodes that you actually need to watch to go into Ahsoka or anything. But I think you could basically start halfway through season 2 and go from there. If you don't,
she just showed up in the last episode I watched for the very first time.
Yeah, so I think that would work out if you want to sort of minimize it. You could start it halfway through season 2 and go from there, and you'd catch everything that you need to catch and be able to fill in the gaps from season 1. But I will just say, I thought the whole relationship between Hera and Kanan was I liked it better in season 1 than basically at any other time in the series.
Well, they're dating, right? I mean...
Well, yeah, that seemed clear in season 1, and then they, really step back from that for, the remainder of the seasons, without any sort of...
I got the impression at the very beginning they were married.
Right,
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, that's how close they seem. That's how they talk to each other.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I can see where you're coming from, for sure.
So that was a little... I felt like... So, yeah, like I mentioned before, the series gets darker and darker as it goes on. Right. Since it was still meant to be kids could watch this show and that, I didn't feel like the emotional ending that came towards the end of the whole series and that really kind of knocked me as hard as I wanted it to, because I don't think they were trying to traumatize kids who might be watching this show.
This is not the beginning of Bambi or anything like that,
That's
or the beginning of Up. We're not trying to send some kids to therapy for the rest of their lives.
But since I had seen at least the first couple of episodes of Ahsoka before I finished Rebels the series, I was actually kind of surprised of how directly they tied in. I didn't think that the end of Rebels was going to get that close to the beginning of Ahsoka, so that kind of surprised me. I mean, not in any sort of bad way. I was just like, oh, they're really tied. So, I mean, Ahsoka really is Rebels Season 5. It
really is, yeah.
It absolutely is.
You can see, even from the very first episode, you see the same city, you see the same tower, you see the same...
The highway. The very distinct highway on Lothal. So yeah,
it almost opens exactly the same, right?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So they definitely are two series that are tied together. Ahsoka absolutely is live action Rebels season 5. So that said, since I finished up Rebels, I managed to get through all the episodes of Ahsoka that were available as of the time of this recording, which means up through episode 6. So I'm not going to spoil anything for Tom because he hasn't gone through there. But I just wanted to mention that I very much liked the character of Sabine on Rebels. She was probably my favorite character watching through all of that. So I'm happy that Ahsoka has a lot of Sabine in it. And the actress that they cast to play Sabine, I'm like, they must have been over the moon to find her because I can't imagine anyone looking more, acting more like Sabine in live action. They must have been she's the perfect age. She has Sabine in animation is skinnier than any human could realistically be and exist because she's a cartoon on the cartoon series, and that's okay. But I'm like, you got about as close as you could with an actor portraying someone who's that thin but still athletic, because Natasha Bortizzo, who's portraying her, she's Australian, which I didn't know, so doing a great job with the accent. But she's trained in martial arts, and there's a whole scene where it's she's even though she's incredibly thin, she's muscular. Like,
right.
And she's got the martial arts background that she looks like she can do all of those things physically. I don't know how much they used a stunt double and how much is her, but there's plenty where it's like, it's her with her face. I don't know if they're doing some like facial CGI double, but I don't think so. Yeah. I don't think so. I think it's actually her doing it because she's capable of doing it in real life. So like, and then I saw a little tidbit on the casting where it was like Jon Favreau was saying it was a bit unusual casting because they offered her the part just off of her audition tape. They never even brought her in person to audition. They're like, that's the person we want. Do you want the part? And she's like, okay, this is like way too easy. I'm like, yeah, I think I would have done it too. Because like I said, I can't imagine someone being more perfect casting than that.
What do you think about Ahsoka, though? Her performance.
Rosario Dawson?
Yeah, Rosario Dawson, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, she is definitely, I think, less emotional than the cartoon version of Ahsoka. Yes. She's very reserved. Of course, her voice sounds different too, so that does, it's like, because we've seen quite a, if you've watched the animation, we've seen quite a bit of Ahsoka. So we've gotten used to her voice, which is a higher pitch in the cartoon version than, so I mean, like, I'm not going to expect Rosario Dawson to do that. No. But yeah, I mean, she does feel like, well, she feels like an older, more mature character, which she's supposed to be. This is supposed to be 9 years later. So I'm fine with that. Yeah, I think she's more emotive in the cartoon version.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So we'll see how I feel about it once I get there.
Yeah.
I think I'm finishing up I think I just watched the last episode of season 1. I'm not exactly sure. I also started, my wife and my youngest son watched Iron Man when I was out of the house, which is unusual for them to do. But so my son wanted to watch Iron Man 2, and I'm like, well, it's a crap movie. It's pretty garbage. And he's like, well, let's not watch it then. I'm like, no, I mean, we can still watch it. It's just know what you're going in. It's not going to be as good as the first one.
And it's the introduction of Black Widow, so.
It is, and that's exactly where we got to before we stopped, I think, right where they're in the donut section after the party. The opening of that movie is way better than I remember it being. I did not like this movie almost at all. Like, I watched it and went, okay, I'm never watching it again. And so to come back and watch it a second time with having such low expectations, it's actually quite a bit better. I mean, they spend a lot more time with Mickey Rourke's character, Whiplash, is that what his name? I don't even remember what his name is.
Yeah, his villain name anyway.
Spend a lot more time with that character at the beginning, and then they generally do with villains, and I tend to like movies where, at least Marvel movies, where they spend a little bit more time with the villains, because we already know the heroes. The heroes aren't very interesting. It's the villains that saves the movie, and they spend quite a bit of time with him. I found his performance to be better than I remembered it being. Okay. His whole face thing I find to be very distracting.
Okay.
And the whole botched plastic surgery or whatever's going on with him.
I'm not going to blame him for that.
Distracting. I mean, it is what it is. I still find it distracting.
The character's supposed to have lived a hard life, so I can take that. Yeah, it works.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. But anyway, so far, I don't know if I'm quite halfway through the movie, but about halfway through the movie.
In case you can't tell, Tom hasn't watched much.
Yeah. Well, and I'm also watching it on a laptop.
That's right.
We kind of pushed some stuff around in the home theater so that we could at least sit on the couch that's in there. And now my laptop is perched up on my center channel far enough away so that we can still recline the couch, which means it's very small. I did tell my wife, I'm like, listen, I'm never buying another bulb for this projector.
Right.
Like, we're gonna have to just suck it up and buy a TV after this. I'm like, we're going to buy a TV. I'm not dealing with this anymore.
They can get quite affordable now for big sizes.
I know. She's like, can we get a discount? I'm like, no. I'm not going to get any discounts. There's nobody to get discounts from. I don't think there's discounts to be had. I don't think they're making much money on these things. All right. So, more on that in a couple of years when my bulb dies. All right. Let's start the podcast. This is AVRant, the podcast that answers your home theater and AV questions. To get your questions answered, all you have to do is ask us by emailing us at question@avrant.com. Go to our website, AVRant, find our episodes, our show notes, and our Flickr albums so that you can follow along with the pictures of which we are speaking. Facebook.com/AVRant podcast, YouTube.com/AVRant, where you can see our live or half of our live recording sessions.
That's right, for the time being.
Logo. Yeah, for right now. I'm a little echoey, I think, still, but it's the way it's going to be.
It's pretty okay.
It's not so bad. If you can contact us directly, it's rob@avrant.com. His other social media is @FirstReflect. I'm Tom at avrant.com, and I've forsaken all other.
Fair enough.
I never could get Threads. They never gave it to me. They
never
like
worked.
Every time I tried to like we'll send you an email. They never freaking sent me an email with a code, or send me a text. They're supposed to send me a text with a code. I'm like, I don't know who's getting that text, but somebody got a lot of them because it wasn't me.
Good times.
Stupid thing. All right, we want to thank our listeners of the week. To become a listener of the week, to support the podcast in some way. If you want to do that financially and you want to do it every month, you go to patreon.com/AVRantPodcast, where you become a monthly contributor to the podcast. Mm-hmm. We have 134 patrons who every month, Patreon takes a little bit of money from them and gives most of it to us. So thank you to all our patrons.
Yeah, that is patreon.com/AVRantPodcast. If you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation, so big thank you to our 134 patrons over there. We appreciate your financial support.
If you can't support us financially, we understand. Just support us in some other ways, and we will mention you here. And last week I asked Rohan to let me know if I could use his photos of his rants menus. On AV Gadgets, and he did write back and say yes, and I have already uploaded them all. They are all in there. I did not name them very well. They're just called AV Receiver Menu Rohan 01, 02, 03, 04, 05, whatever, however many there are. So every time I want to use them, I'm going to have to go through the whole thing, and maybe I'll start renaming them.
40-something of them.
There's a bunch of them.
But
so thank you, Rohan.
Thank you, Rohan. It's appreciated, yes.
We also got notes of gratitude for keeping the podcast going through... I don't remember
whatever life might throw at us. Oh,
yes. Somebody's got a bunch of
up in Canada. We have political problems going on between us and India. So yeah, that's all in the background.
Did you guys really? I guess I didn't hear about that one.
Oh yes, yeah. There was. Well, a suspected assassination and accusations of government involvement.
You guys assassinated somebody?
No, other way around.
Believe it when I see it.
Other way around, and then all kinds of political fallout from that, because stuff that wasn't made public and things that don't want to be admitted. And
Florida put up some sort of force field and sending all the hurricanes up to Nova Scotia. So
that is going on as well. Yep.
But I heard you guys had this forest fire, so we're helping out. I think in our own Floridian way.
I don't think we want that. Plus wind. Not good.
Right.
Not great.
Right. Well, we don't. Yeah. We don't really understand fires down here. So we got notes of gratitude from Rohan, Mark, and Dan. And Dan says he hopes things are progressing well for me. They are not. They're not progressing at all. They're not progressing poorly. It's just, so we have, for those of you that care, the process is you contact all your appropriate insurance companies. The insurance companies that are going to cover something will tell you, yes, we will cover something, because flooding is different than wind and rain and that sort of thing. So you have to contact the homeowners insurance as well as the flooding. So basically, flood insurance is going to cover the stuff that we need to have covered. So we have to get quotes and all this other stuff. We've sent everything. We finally sent everything over to the flood insurance company. And they're like, okay, well, these are the problems we see with what you have sent over. Okay. So now we have to go back to our the remediation company and say, listen, you need it. This is what they're saying. Give us something that doesn't have these problems, so we can send it back to them.
All right.
And it's mostly just like they have doubled up on some. I think it's just verbiage. I think that if they changed the way that they phrase, like some things are like it says remediation or something. What they mean is we're going to come in and fix everything, and then we have to clean up afterwards.
Okay.
And they use the word remediation for that part, and the insurance company's like, we don't like that word. You already did the remediation. Right. That's a different thing. And this is so. Anyways, and we're at least a month from them doing that. And what we really need for our own personal sake, other than getting the house fixed, is for them to send us a check and tell us how much money they're going to give us or at least tell us how much money they're going to give us for all the stuff that got ruined in the garage.
Yes, yeah.
So, because right now we can't throw anything away because they might say we want more pictures.
Right.
So, we've gotten rid of like a couple of things, like the refrigerator that went south. We got rid of that because they had already taken a bunch of pictures. And it takes up a
pile of space.
Yeah, and then a couple of other things that we know that we've got good pictures of. Those things have gone away, but everything else is kind of in the middle of the garage and in the way. And we're actually just going to just toss most of it and just decide, slowly whether or not we really needed it to begin with. So but there are some things I would really like to purchase, like our bicycle pump got ruined. So I'm buying another one of those because I have to have it because I got it, whatever. And then all the tools I had, like, well, how could your tools get ruined? All my tools were, very conveniently located on top of a shop vac, which it was actually a square shop vac with a flat top, and I had them all right there where I would put my bike and I would work on my bike right there, and I put them on top. Well, the shop vac was empty and floated, and so it floated and knocked over, and all of my tools went into the. So my torque wrenches shot, my all my Allen wrenches are they immediate, like within 24 hours they were completely corroded. It was amazing to me how bad it was. Right. So yes, they are. It's not progressing at all right now. We're in a holding pattern, but soon, hopefully. And he asks, Rob, how are things now after the water damaged your apartment last year?
Yeah, so everything's fine here. I got floors replaced and all that. Basically, I never replaced my TV, my OLED that got damaged, because I'm just waiting because I kind of want to get a G series, but I'm not going to pay full price for when they came out. So I'm kind of waiting on that. So look, I'm not suffering. I've still got my Z9D, so that's perfectly fine. But basically, as far as my theater goes, I just minimally set it up to be functional, and there's just wires everywhere, and I don't actually have my height speakers mounted height wise. I'm like, whatever, they're going to be up firing for now, because I'm like, until I get my new TV, I'm not going to bother putting it together like whole hogs. So that's why you haven't heard anything from me about my theater. It's like I can go in there and I don't care how dirty and messy it looks, and I can listen to stuff, and that's good enough for now.
Good for you. All right, so thank you to Rohan, Mark, and Dan for thanking us.
Indeed, thank you, Rohan, Mark, and Dan.
All right, in the news, just to put a ribbon on a story from earlier in the year, MQA Limited, makers of the master quality authenticated audio codec, which filed for bankruptcy, is now being purchased by Lenbrook Corp, which is a Canadian company that owns NAD, PSB, and Blue Sound. In addition to the MQA codec, MQA Limited also held the patent on SCL6, which is a lossless high-res wireless audio codec that seems to be of most interest to PSB, as they've announced plans to use it in new wireless headphone models in 2024. So
it was just to sum up and get to the end of what happened with MQA going bankrupt. This is it. They've been purchased. I'm sure they're happy.
So I wrote an article this morning. In fact, that's one of the reasons we're starting later than we were supposed to, Rob, is because I was working on the article.
Okay.
I think it's called 7. It might end up being more. 7 bad home theater upgrades. And it's all of them are basically things we talk about in this podcast where people upgrade because they think it'll make a difference, but it doesn't actually. It's not like the products don't do anything, right? It's like MQA. It's not like it doesn't do anything. It's just that it doesn't do anything that you can hear. Or anything that's real in this case.
Beneficial, or sometimes even what the actual mastering engineers said, despite it supposedly being authenticated. That's pretty questionable. Yeah, that was all a pretty dubious thing, MQA. Yeah. And even Tidal has dropped it at this point, and they were the source of MQA if it was anybody's. So, look, MQA Limited, that was the company. MQA, Master Quality Authenticated, that was the codec. It doesn't really seem like the group that owns them now, the group that owns NAD and PSB, is even all that interested in MQA itself.
So they just want the SCL6.
Yeah, it seems like that's what they really bought it for. Yeah.
Fair enough, man. I really think that there should be a push for TV manufacturers and AV receiver manufacturers to make it easy to connect not just one, but multiple sets of headphones with individual volume controls to their products. I think that should be the next big feature. And the reason is we have an aging population, and they're the ones with money anyways. So you need to start, what do they want? They want to be able to hear stuff.
Yep.
Okay. And if you can make it so that there's a the microphone that's in the headphones that you have, actually you can set that up so that you can hear people talking to each other with the headphones on. Oh my God, dude. That would immediately make money. In my mind, that would immediately make money. All right. Amazon announced that the price for Prime membership will remain the same in 2024, but Amazon Prime Video will be getting ads. They say they aim to have meaningfully fewer ads than linear TV and other streaming TV options. But if you just stick with your normal Amazon Prime membership, TV shows and movies will not have commercial interruptions. Goodbye to me watching anything on Amazon Prime.
Yeah,
I'm not paying any more for it.
That's gonna be frustrating. I mean, look, the thing is, a lot of us sort of have Amazon Prime Video by default because we're paying for Amazon Prime primarily for the shipping, and that will continue. It's not like that's going to... And you know what? I was happy to hear that the cost of Prime membership, as far as the shipping and all that goes, is not going up next year, because it could have. You know, they've raised it occasionally, but they said outright, no plans to raise the price of regular Amazon Prime, the subscription. So look, we're still going to have Prime Video just by default as a result of that. But yeah, they're gonna start inserting ads into this. They say fewer than other streamers. So I mean, if it's similar to Freevee, their free ad supported service that they already have, then we're looking somewhere in the realm of 3 to 6 minutes per half hour, which is still quite a bit. You know, it's not nothing, but it's less than linear TV, obviously. So there you go.
I don't want this.
I don't relish it. I mean,
anyways,
particularly
if you can't stand the ads, you'll have to pay have the option to pay an additional $3 per month for ad free. This will be starting in early 2024 in the USA, Canada, and the UK and Germany. And I don't know when it's going to start every place else. Anyways,
so they want to get more money from the video service. Bottom line, that's it.
Fair enough. Again, I cannot stress enough how I think that we've been paying too little for these streaming services.
It's been a loss leader just to get subscribers to come in.
The only people that make any money is Netflix, and they're spending it all on content. And now if they get this SAG-AFTRA and writer strike, that's going to go away. So I expect prices to go up across the board. What that means for me personally is we're going to have a conversation in our house about what we want.
Yeah.
As far as what we want to have access to, and we'll probably So the next big push after this will be them having early cancellation fees, or not
sure,
having a
starting to sign contracts just like cable used to. We're just getting back to cable. That's all that's happening.
A la carte was never going to work the way that everybody wanted it to. They thought they were going to be able to get exactly what they wanted for a lot less money, and they're like, well, we still need the money. And if you want the quality of content, you have to think to yourself, I have to somehow support that. I mean, they can't pay everybody else what they need to get paid in order to do. You may be saying, okay, actors are getting paid too much, producers are getting paid too much. That may be true, and I will not argue with you, but somebody has to take a pay cut, and I guarantee you nobody is going, I'll take the pay cut. Very rarely does that happen.
Definitely nobody volunteering for that. Yeah, that is absolutely.
Even though I definitely should be the studio execs. Like, no one needs that much money. I'm sorry. If you have enough money to buy an island, that's too much money. All right, in a blow to ATSC 3.0 NextgenTV, which is a very long name for a thing, LG has announced that precisely none of their 2024 TVs will include the ATSC 3.0 tuners. For the past several years, LG's G and Z series models have come with an ATSC 3.0 tuner built in, and LG has been one of the most vocal supporters for Next-Gen TV overall, but they got into a patent dispute with Constellation Designs, and LG lost, which would mean an increase in royalties needed to be paid from the $3 per ATSC tuner they are paying now to a whopping $6.75 for each tuner. How many tuners go into each TV? It's just one, right?
Yes.
How could they pass that exorbitant expense off to consumers?
On a $4,000 TV, if you had to add an extra $5, I don't know. I think it's the end.
Somebody that they picked this hill to die on. Apparently, that is just more than LG can bear. So bye Next-Gen TV tuners. What? Actually, ever? I mean, okay. So from the standpoint of the consumer, right? This is on you. Honestly, if you are an LG consumer, if you are a TV consumer, if you are not using that ATSC 3.0 Next-Gen TV tuner, then you are the reason why LG is like, I don't think anybody's using this thing anyways. I'm not paying $1 extra for it. I'm not paying 1 cent extra for it.
I mean, when you use the built-in tuner, there's no way to record anything. It's just a single tuner, live television, broadcast television. So you connect an antenna, and there it is. You watch it when it's live, and there's no recording it when you're using the built-in tuner. So yeah, I would suspect that the number of people actually making use of the built-in ATSC 3.0 tuners is pretty low as a percentage and as a whole number. I think it's probably pretty low. So I mean, look, there are the outboard NextgenTV tuners. That's what you're going to have to rely on going forward, and then that gives you the option to record something. So I think that, in a way, makes quite a bit more sense. And look, yeah, we're joking at the, okay, it went up a cost of $3.75 per thing. Margins on televisions are razor thin. They you know, and,
I don't know if they're $3.75 then, but they are pretty thin.
There are many TVs out there being sold quite literally where the profit they make on it is $1 or $2, and it seems like that's a heck of a way to make a buck or two. Is, you know, like manufacturing an entire TV, distributing it, advertising it, all of that, just to make a buck or two. That's not even an exaggeration. There are I'm not LG's OLEDs, but other TVs that are out there, the margins are crazy thin. Now, look, could you just slap an extra $5 onto the price and make up the difference? Yeah, you could, but yeah, the way things are working out,
or you could just get rid of the tuner and you triple your profits.
That's what it is, you know. And they're looking
quadruple actually.
They're looking at you know, in aggregate, okay, how many TVs are we selling? How many millions of dollars is that? You know, going out to manufacture it, not necessarily all of them being sold, right? So, you know, that's how the business goes, and they're just like, yep, an extra $3.75, forget it. We're just gonna rip it out of there.
It's so funny.
It's just overall, ATSC 3.0 has not rolled out in any way, shape, or form the way that we hoped that it would. Yeah, it's rough.
You know, and it's very easy. Again, this goes back to the very beginning of this podcast. It's very easy from the outside to look at something like this and go, "This is just so stupid." But the minute you say the word "just," it's one of my main mottos in life is you've seriously underestimated the complexity of the problem. There's a lot going on here. There's a lot going on here. Like, and one of the things I like about learning about other industries is having somebody talk about something that seems so simple, and then they're like, "Oh my God, that is such a nightmare." You're like, "What are you talking about? How could that possibly?" And then they talk about it for 35 minutes straight, and you're like, well, that really is kind of complicated. Now that you're saying, I mean, I didn't realize how much went on to making a hot dog bun or whatever it is. You know, it's so stupid. All right, some comments from listeners. Mark heard me mention about the volume in my car. Sometimes gets stuck at a low level, and it's typically right after a text or a call has come in. Mark and his wife both experienced the same thing, but he knows it was only if their phones were not set to silent, and therefore the text notification sound or the phone ringer was trying to play. As long as they always keep their phones set to silent when they're in the car, it doesn't seem to ever be a problem, and calls still pop up on their car screen. So no important calls get missed with the ringer off. Just a thought. Maybe it'll work for me too. That's not it. Anyway, because my phone automatically goes to silent because of driver mode or whatever. That's not it. Okay. That's a good thought though. And it's I had something. It did it to me again today, the other day, and I was thinking about it, this exact thing, and it was like the Bluetooth was just connecting as I got something in at the same. It was. I don't know. Believe me, this is not the kind of thing that is fixed because of a common problem. I'm absolutely convinced it's because my particular head unit is jacked up. Like the screen will sometimes just go black for a while and I have to tap on it, and then the Forerunner logo will come up and the music will play the whole time, but the screen will like reset. It's fun. All right, let's get to the questions here. Yeah. Jim, we've had a couple conversations now about subwoofer phase relationships and which direction a front-firing sub is facing in relation to its partner. Jim really appreciates it, but has to admit intuitively that it hasn't just quite clicked for him yet. We've always said we don't mind revisiting topics because we know it sometimes takes some repetition or a slightly different explanation for it to click, so throw him into that category, and he hopes we won't mind delving in this topic yet again. I'm not talking about this. Let's skip this question. I'm sorry. Rob. I must have lost Rob.
Well, we're back. Yeah, we had a Skype glitch there.
I made a joke. You didn't laugh. And
sorry.
I think that you have ruined the podcast, and I'm going to end it right here.
That wasn't
Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.
Wasn't me just giving him the silent treatment. I didn't hear it because we had a Skype dropout. Apologies.
Right, I am on wireless, so we can blame me for this. Okay. I am wirelessly connected to my system because I cannot be wired because the wire is in the home theater. All right, and it was doused in dirty water. Let's see what happens with that when I try to reconnect. All right, so we're gonna go into this topic. And one thing that's really thrown him was hearing us say that if you leave one of your subwoofers alone and you physically rotate your other subwoofer 180 degrees so that it's just facing the opposite direction, talking about this front firing subwoofers here, that's essentially the same thing as just flipping the 180 degree polarity switch or setting one of those subs to be 180 degrees out of phase. He can't quite wrap his mind around how that can be true, particularly since we say bass is omnidirectional, that we've never actually hear the direct sound when we're in a room, only reflected sound. Moreover, if it were true that you could change the phase relationship between your two subs by just altering the direction the driver is facing, wouldn't it just be common knowledge and something posted all over the forums that if you don't have a fully variable phase knob, or if you're trying to adjust the blend between your subs and speakers in the crossover region, just go ahead and physically rotate your subwoofers? Surely people would be selling lazy Susans for subwoofers if this worked. What is he missing here? Hopefully we make sense of it for him. All right, the easiest way to think about this, put the subs side by side. Okay. If you put the subs side by side, right, and they're both facing forward, then when the driver of one is pushing out, the driver of the other one is also pushing out, right?
Yeah, so they are in the same direction, all interfacing with the air at exactly the same time in the same direction. Okay.
Yes. So if you then took one of those subs and you turned them 180 degrees so it was facing backwards, then every time one sub was pushing out, the other sub would be pushing out, but in the opposite direction. So it would be the equivalent of that same driver pulling in. Okay, so they are now 180 degrees out of phase.
Okay, the two subwoofers.
So that's side by side. This is what we're saying. So one of the reasons why this is something that we like when you will never in a million years hear me say, turn your subwoofer 3 degrees to the left and that will help, whatever. Okay, if your subwoofers are properly placed, they are across the room from each other, right? In some way, right? So and they're if they're front firing, they're almost always firing into the room. So you were like, okay, now they're 180 degrees out of phase. That's technically true in that the drivers themselves are going in opposite directions with the same note.
If the driver is trying to move the air molecules from the front of the room to the back of the room, the subwoofer that's at the front of the room, then at the exact same moment, if they're in mono and playing in phase, then the subwoofer at the back of the room is trying to move the air molecules from the back of the room to the front of the room at the exact same time. That is what would be going on if they're across the room from each other. It would also be the case where, two subs side by side, but one of them facing the polar opposite direction of the other one. One of them is trying to move the air molecules from the front of the room to the back of the room. The other is trying to move the air molecules from the front of the room to the front of the room. It's just trying to move the air molecules in the opposite direction at the exact same time. I think where the intuition of what the heck is going on, let's say you've got the two subwoofers and you've got them side by side. One of them is firing forward, the other one is firing backward. And we're saying, okay, those are exactly 180 degrees out of phase or exactly reverse polarity of each other. And we're saying, okay, intuitively, doesn't that mean the air doesn't move? No. That's the part where we have to remind you that waves pass right through each other. Right. Waves, if two waves meet and they are exactly 180 degrees out of phase, then at the exact physical point in space and time where those two waves meet, there will be no movement of air. But that doesn't mean the waves stop. The one wave that's going, let's say, left to right, that is exactly 180 degrees out of phase with the wave that's, let's say, going from right to left, at the exact moment where they overlap in space and time, there will be no air movement. But on either side of that exact moment in space and time, on either side exactly in space or on either side exactly in time, there will still be air movement because those two waves pass right through each other as though they don't exist. It's only the exact moment in space and time where they interact that you might have no air movement or more air movement than just a single wave would have created by itself. Now, we add to that further complexity because it isn't just the wave being generated by the subwoofer driver out in a wide open field without even a ground beneath it. We also have reflected sound waves from those original sound waves. So we have the air is trying to be moved from the front of the room to the back of the room by subwoofer number 1. But before we ever hear it, those air molecules have all bumped into each other. The one air molecule that was right next to the subwoofer driver, it gets moved and then it bumps into its neighbor and that bumps into its neighbor and it all permeates outward in a hemispherical shape from that moment. But then those bumping air molecules, they reach the walls and they reflect off of those walls and they reflect at all kinds of different angles off of those walls. And then that causes more air movement that ends up coming back the direction that it came from. And we get all these moments of air molecule interaction in time and space where maybe that air molecule is moving less than it would have if it was just a single instant wave that didn't reflect with anything else, or it might move more than if it was just a single instant wave. The whole point being, you end up with a pattern that gets generated. Instead of just thinking of it as a moment wave that is either there or not, or greater in strength than it would be all on its own, like instead of just thinking of it as a single wave moving in a single direction, we have to think of it as a pattern that gets established within the room, because you have more than one source of the wave being generated in the 2 subwoofers in this example, and all the reflections. It is a very complex thing to try and imagine, and it is not exactly intuitive of what is that pattern going to look like. If it was super intuitive and easy to imagine what the pattern would look like, we wouldn't ever say, oh, we can't really tell where the best place is to put your 2 subwoofers.
Yeah, you could just plug your dimensions in, and that'd be it.
You could just imagine what the pattern of waves is going to be like, and you're like, oh, it'll work great at this location. No, it isn't intuitive, and there isn't a way to make it intuitive. If there were, we would have talked about it by now. Even if you are trying to calculate it, to simulate it, it is not an easy simulation to do. Like full wave field synthesis or fluid dynamic synthesis is something that we're actually hoping quantum computers can help us with, because
they're so complex. That's right.
Probabilities involved, and from air molecule to air molecule, they aren't even necessarily completely uniform. You can have
they're not evenly spaced in any way, shape, or form.
There's a gazillion variables going on here, but to boil it all down to something that we can at least intuit as to why is it that physically rotating a subwoofer could have any sort of effect on the sound that we hear, versus, if I have 2 subwoofers and they're both just facing forward, or one is facing off to the side while the other is facing forward, or one is facing backward while the other is facing forward. Why would that make any difference when we're talking about, okay, the original wave got generated by those subwoofers, but then it went out into the room, propagated out into the room, bounced off of all the walls and everything, and came back to our ears eventually, and we perceive it. Why would it make a lick of difference whether one of those subwoofers is facing backward or sideways or forward or whatever in relation to the other one? It's because of the fact that those waves are passing through each other all the time, that they don't meet and destroy one another, or meet and double up and always stay doubled up for the rest of time and space. It's that they pass right through each other, and that creates patterns in the room. And what we're changing isn't the initial wave coming out of those subwoofers. What we're changing is the pattern, because now we've altered ever so slightly in space and time the meeting of those air molecules. We've slightly altered the time at which they meet in our room, and that generates a different looking pattern in the room. That's what's being altered. Whether you're adjusting the phase knob on your fully variable phase adjustment on your subwoofer, or physically rotating the subwoofer in some way, they aren't a one-to-one relationship necessarily. Physically rotating your sub so that it's aiming 6 degrees off to the left, that's not exactly the same thing as changing the phase knob 6 degrees. It's not going to be the same thing. No. But both things will slightly alter the pattern of the waves that form in your room. That's what we're getting at.
So it's almost an academic question, really.
Yeah.
It really is almost an academic question. Like, oh, so, if I rotate my sub, it's at 180 degrees of the phase. Well, technically it is, at least compared to how it was before.
The other one. Yeah.
But objectively or subjectively, how does that sound different? And the reality is, if you have a subwoofer with a variable phase knob, you can test this out for yourself. You say, I'm going to sit here, we're going to listen to some music or play some sweeps or do whatever it is that you're going to do. And I just have somebody else go over there and just slowly rotate that knob and see how much different it sounds. And then the answer is going to be not very much different, and maybe not different at all, depending on how things go. It may sound a lot different, but it's probably not going to.
But every so once in a while, you'll be doing that experiment and having a bass sweep that's playing on repeat, and there will be one frequency here or there that in that bass sweep suddenly disappears at the particular location where you're listening, because again, it's space and time. And like, you're listening to this bass sweep, all the notes are there for a while. Maybe some of them are a little louder than others. Maybe some of them are a little quieter than others. But you're slowly adjusting the phase knob while the bass sweep plays on repeat, or you're physically rotating one of the subwoofers while the bass sweep plays on repeat. And then one of those frequencies, or some of them, just like disappear completely or get way louder than they've ever been before. And that is this whole pattern of waves that gets established. Now, you take a step to your left or right, and that isn't necessarily true anymore, because now where you're listening from is a different space-time location in relation to the pattern of waves that's been generated. So, yeah,
so the reason that we don't sell Lazy Susans for subwoofers so that people can make these adjustments or whatever is because the differences are generally not that great, and you are already making those adjustments with your room correction. When your room correction goes through and changes the distances, it's changing the phase or changing the phase relation. And there's really, outside of, I guess an audiophile who refuses to use room correction or whatever. I don't see that there's much benefit to ever doing this, especially when most subs come with phase knobs that nobody touches anyways. So what's the point of putting this thing on the Lazy Susan?
Also, the whole notion of wouldn't people be talking about the physical rotation of your subwoofers if altering the physical relationship between two bass-producing things resulted in audibly different results. That is talked about, not necessarily in exactly the language that we just said, but when we do go to the audiophile crowd, which is like strictly full-range, two-channel only, no subwoofers, no room correction. We are only going to deal with the two tower speakers that I'm playing full range. They absolutely do talk about little adjustments to toe in, little adjustments to the distance from the speaker to the walls. They absolutely talk about that stuff, because without a subwoofer present, without room correction being applied, without phase adjustments being made between the two things that are producing sound, all you have left are physical adjustments that you can do to slightly alter the wave pattern that's being generated in your room. So I would say it is discussed, just maybe it wasn't recognizable in the form that it took or the exact words.
Because they're not talking about it in the same way that we're talking about it.
I mean, they're often not talking about subwoofers at all. So if you were looking up, well, why aren't we talking about rotating my subwoofer? Well, they're not talking about that, but they are talking about ever so tiny toe-in adjustments to their tower speaker, which, I mean, all of that's a little bit dubious. But look, in the absence of any other way to alter the wave pattern in your room, you're left with, I have to physically move my tower full range speaker. That's the only way I can make any difference to the bass that I'm hearing at my one seating location. So it is discussed. Or the moving of the seating location is another way, just it's on the reciprocal side of this. We're talking about altering the listening position in time and space to put yourself, the listener, in a different part of the wave pattern. And that's another way that it's discussed, but not necessarily in the language you were looking for.
All right, Rohan. Last week we discussed Rohan's issue with his new Marantz SR6015 receiver, where he sometimes gets no sound, particularly when using HEOS, but occasionally when he's using his disc player or Amazon Fire TV 2. I immediately guessed HDMI-CC was to blame, and Rob specifically made some suggestions for setting changes, mostly related to the Marantz's TV audio input, which is how the audio return channel is activated. Rohan wasn't able to test out our suggestions right away as he was out of town for a week, but he thanked us all for going through all of it, while also thinking of one other wrinkle that he'd like to ask us about. Thankfully, just in time for our topic list this week, he wrote back to say, success. He hasn't had time for extensive testing yet, of course, but he'll update us later, or if anything crops up. But for the first time since getting his Marantz receiver, everything seems to work the way it should, with Hios behaving itself and content playing from his Panasonic UV420 and the Amazon Fire TV without any audio interruptions.
Hooray!
HDMI-CC sucks.
But happy to hear that he had some success. That is promising.
He did change more than one setting all at once, so there's no way to be certain if it was just a single setting that caused the initial problems. He set the HDMI output to monitor 2 only, turn off HDMI pass-through, and manually deactivated TV audio switching. He also set the TV audio input to show up in the sources list, along with his Panasonic player and Amazon Fire TV. How the heck did Rob ever know about that being an issue anyway? I don't know, Rob.
Pure experience, trial and error, because I went through that. Like at one point when I was using one of my LG OLEDs, I actually wanted to use particularly the YouTube app that was built into the LG OLED, because the app that was built into the OLED had better capabilities than my Apple TV 4K when it came specifically to YouTube. So I was trying to use the audio return channel, and I ran into a multitude of problems because in some instances, like if I didn't have the TV audio switching working to try and do things automatically, then it was like, why isn't that working the way that it should? When I tried to just select it manually, it like mostly worked, but then I went through this whole hiding of inputs thing as well, because I was trying to get it so that it wouldn't switch automatically, and like I thought, okay, maybe hiding the input will just make it go away, and it's like as soon as I did that, everything went to hell. So I'm like, okay, that seems to be one of the problems, is hiding that TV audio input. So yeah, it was pure trial and error and experience on my own part that led to that suggestion.
Didn't even read it someplace. Got to scroll past all these menus.
Right, yes.
But on to one other related question. He uses a Harmony 650 remote to control his home theater system. His Harmony activities are pretty straightforward, since he pretty much only uses his disc player, Fire TV, and Hios. So his TV powers on, his Marantz powers on. Whichever source he's using powers on. The input for the Marantz gets selected, but then he manually added a little bit more. He programmed a 5-second delay after those initial steps, and following the delay, the remote sends a command to his Marantz to select the auto listening mode. Mm-hmm. Any chance that it's that listening mode command that screws things up and makes his speakers go silent? Would it be helpful to increase the delay so that it's longer than 5 seconds? He'd appreciate our thoughts. I don't remember what the exact initial problem he was having, but when you switch listening modes, there can be a slight pause in the playback of the music, but increasing or decreasing this delay will make no change to that, other than when it happens. So there's the issue. I don't see any really problem here. Like,
so if you're like, let's say, selecting something on your streamer, and it's like, okay, when you're just in the menus, that's very often just 2-channel PCM, and then you start a movie playing, and there is an ad, and that ad comes in 5.1 or 2.0 Dolby Digital, and then the movie actually starts playing, and it switches over to, Dolby Atmos in a Dolby Digital Plus container, that type of thing. So there's like codecs that are changing on the fly. That can be the case from a streaming device. So the idea that if nothing were playing and you have a command being sent to select your listening mode prior to there actually being any sort of signal, that could create a signal lock-on problem. It's not completely out of the realm of possibility. That being said, if you're choosing the auto listening mode, then that shouldn't really be the case. Now, I think going back to the SR6015, at that time, the auto listening mode still automatically applied an up mixer to everything that came in. That is not the case on the newest Cinema series Marantz AV receivers, or the newest, all the models that end in an 800 in Denon's lineup. They finally changed it on those newest models so that the auto listening mode just does straight decoding, right? So 5.1 plays in 5.1, and 7.1 plays in 7.1, and 2.0 plays in 2.0. That is kind of the way we always wanted that to work. And it finally does that. But I believe with the SR6015, it was still doing the old version where it always applied an up mixer. So the thing is, if that's what you prefer to use, is the auto listening mode, as long as you've set that once, you shouldn't have to have your Harmony send that command every single time that you power on your system. I mean, the Denon and Marantzes do most definitely remember whatever the last listening mode was for any given incoming audio codec. They do go codec by codec, and by default, they just go to straight decoding. If you've never ever touched the listening mode button, they'll just go to straight decoding by default. But if auto is your preferred mode, as long as you've gone to that once with whatever codec is coming in, it will remember that that's what you used with every given codec, and it should not be necessary to have that command in there. So yeah, my suggestion would be to actually just remove that 5-second delay and the auto listening mode command being sent from the Harmony. That might mean you will occasionally come across an instance where from a given source, a new codec is coming in for the first time, and you will have to press, in your case on the Marantz remote, the pure listening mode button, I think 3 times until it says auto on the front panel there. That might still occasionally happen for you, but once you've done it once for every given codec from every given source, there's no need to do it again. So yeah.
There's, again, I mean, if your thought process here is, I don't want to ever have to go through that, I just want always to be in auto mode. No matter what, no matter what device I add, no matter what happens, I always want it to be in auto mode. Then you can leave it in there. It's just going to create a slight.
But the thing is, that still doesn't necessarily make it work every time, because, like I say, if you're in the situation where the menu was a different codec from the ad was a different codec from the movie itself, you haven't pressed auto listening mode 3 times in your Harmony activity, you're still going to have to press it manually if you happen to run across a codec from a source that you've never used that combo before.
This is what I would do. I would take that out, that 5-second delay out. I would take the auto listening mode command out, and I would hard code, if you can, I don't know how that remote works, to one of the other buttons on the Harmony remote. The auto listening mode setting.
You stick it on that like E button that doesn't get used for anything else.
And if you look down at your Marantz and it's not showing auto,
that's right,
then you press the button. Or if you're just like, I'm not sure if this is auto or not, boom, hit it, and then you're done. So that's for every activity, you just choose a button, or make one of the screen buttons, the programmable screen buttons. Just for every activity, you have the auto listening mode as just a button on your Harmony remote, and now you can very easily press it at any time and not have to rely on an automated command as being part of the starting an activity thing. I would remove that. All right, Lance. Lance has a Denon X4700H receiver, and he recently bought a 5-channel OSD Nero XA5180. This might be 5180. I think
5180, or 5180. Although that doesn't actually truthfully represent. So the 5 works. The 5, it's a 5-channel. The 5 works in that model number.
Maybe it's 180 into 2 channels. Anyways, Nero XA5180 external amp, priced at $700. It's a Class H design with individual Class AB amplifier blades inside, along with a toroidal power transformer. It has both RCA and XLR inputs, and it's rated to output 135 watts into 8 ohms with 0.1% THD, total harmonic distortion, all channels driven. So maybe it's 180 into 2 channels.
2 channels driven, that could be the case.
That could be it. Would be my guess, because the The X is stupid. The A is just whatever the model number is, and then 5 channels and 180 watts per.
Yeah. Now this doesn't look identical to any of Emotiva's amps, but a lot of the internals look a whole lot like a Jade Designs based amplifier, and that Class H is something that Jade Designs does. A lot of Jade Designs, if you aren't familiar, is the parent company of Emotiva. Yeah. So I would not be the least bit shocked whatsoever, because a lot of the specs look like a Jade Designs amplifier as well.
It does.
If that was the OEM, that would be unsurprising to me.
So, since adding the OSD amp, Lance says he has noticed that he picked up a few dBs along with cinematic dynamics, whatever that means.
Those were his exact words, so I just put them in there.
The quote, picked up a few dB along with cinematic dynamics, end quote. Mm-hmm. But he says he is also experiencing some ear fatigue now that wasn't there when he was just using his Denon's built-in amps. By all accounts and reviews, from reviews, the OSD XA amps are linear and neutral, so are there any adjustments he should be making to his Denon settings that might help to reduce the ear fatigue? He says he has Odyssey on and it's set to the reference target curve. He's using a 5.2.4 configuration with the Emotiva T2 plus tower front, left, and right speakers, clip, center, and surrounds, and a PB2000 and PC2000 pair of subwoofers. I'm going to assume that you reran Odyssey.
Well, that's the thing, because that was my, I was like, did you rerun Odyssey?
Because that would be the very first and most important thing that you should have done. Yeah. If you just plugged in this amp and said, all it's doing is powering those speakers, so and they're all, if they're getting a boost, they're all getting a boost at the same amount because it's the same amplifier and all this stuff. Right. You don't have to do it. Well, now everything's louder than it should be. Because you just said it picked up a few dBs. It shouldn't have.
Yeah, it should
be the same number of dBs because it should be calibrated to reference level.
That's right.
Which means that the trim level should have been reset so that when you were on 0 dB on your receiver, it's the exact same volume as 0 dB on your receiver when you didn't have the amp. So if you just plugged in the amp and now you're getting ear fatigue, it's because it's louder than it should be at any given volume level on the receiver.
While everything does measure nicely linearly and all that type of thing, the notion that if you do, so there's a couple of things, right? If he didn't rerun Odyssey whatsoever, then it would kind of make sense that if this external amplifier just has a bit more gain to it than the built-in amplifiers, that everything got louder, right? For a given master volume setting, everything got louder. That kind of sounds from the quote that he gave us that maybe that's what he did. Picked up a few dB. I'm assuming I set my master volume to where I normally set it, but everything's a few dB louder and therefore sounds a bit more like a cinema, a bit more dynamic because, everything's louder than that now. Okay, so that could alone be responsible for the bit of ear fatigue that you're listening to. When you say it noticeably sounds a few dB louder, that might be more than a few dB. Because to be noticeably louder, right? 3
dB is what we can notice, really. So it's going to be
technically in a clinical study, 1 dB is essentially the room, threshold for something. But 3 dB is where most people would say, that's a bit louder. 3 dB, 6 dB to 10 dB is where we're like, oh yeah, that's significantly getting towards twice as loud as it used to be. So if you're like, oh, it's noticeably louder, it could be in that 6 to 10 dB range, which is definitely not nothing, and could be enough all on its own for ear fatigue. But if we're also in this scenario where you did not rerun Odyssey, then you still have the same equalization that was being applied when you were just using the built-in amplifiers. Should that be significantly different in the frequency response when you just add an external amplifier that itself should be quite neutral and linear? It shouldn't, but it doesn't mean that it's out of the realm of possibility that the EQ would be slightly different if you had rerun Odyssey with the external amplifier in the signal chain. It might have slightly altered what it did to the EQ as well. So that's if you didn't rerun Odyssey. If you did rerun Odyssey, and you're still noticing these types of changes, well, there's this rather large variable of what was your microphone placement the first time you ran Odyssey before you bought the amplifier versus this new time that you reran Odyssey with the external amplifier in the signal chain. The microphone placement from the first time you ran it to the second time you ran it definitely might have changed. I don't know how meticulous you were in exactly the microphone placement. So again, the equalization might have changed, leading to, okay, maybe there is a bit more high frequency energy in addition to it being louder now with the external microphone in there, and that could be leading to some of this fatigue.
Speakers in particular can be a little on the shrill side, especially if you have them pointed directly at your face. So, I mean, there could be a lot of things that are going on here that could create listener fatigue.
You know, he never mentioned it, but oftentimes people get a new component, they're hooking everything up, and they're like, oh, here's an opportunity to also slightly adjust the placement of my speakers. Maybe I raised my center channel or tilted it up a bit. Maybe I towed in my speakers a little bit more than there are other changes that we're not saying that you did, but it's also possible that you did it without having mentioned in your email, not thinking that would have made a significant difference, but it could. So yeah, there are many, many variables at play here. So our suggestion, of course, would be we would rerun Odyssey again.
Yes.
And if you're still finding look, you didn't change any of the speakers, you have rerun Odyssey, you are meticulous about the microphone placement, and at the end of it all, you're still just finding I've got a little bit of ear fatigue and I didn't used to, that's where I would say, go ahead and pay the $20 or $25, whatever it is now, for the Odyssey editor app, because he made no mention of ever having used the app. He just says he's left it to the reference target curve that Odyssey sets by default when you run it directly from the AV receiver. I would say invest that $20 or $25 in the Odyssey editor app. Now you can go in there and manually maybe roll off the high frequencies a little bit, or maybe you even do some measurement and discover, it turns out at 3.5 kilohertz, I have a bit of a hump there. You can move that down manually in the target curve if you have the editor app, and that will, in all likelihood, help you out with reducing that ear fatigue. So those are the settings we would change.
Yes, I agree. Okay. Especially when you said us, we would change. Why is it that the preferred, he says, method for listening to two-channel music is to do so without a subwoofer? Isn't it possible for music to utilize the entire audible frequency range? And also, wouldn't you want to keep the deep bass extension afforded by using a subwoofer? First of all, welcome to the podcast.
Indeed.
It's always good to have new listeners. I'm going to tell you that right now. It's always nice when we find out that somebody is new to the podcast and hasn't ever, is just now exploring this with us. And we're glad to have you here. This question is great in that it's
and
often
I can see
asked,
where he's coming from. I have absolutely seen this advice all over the place in the two-channel music crowd.
Tell you what, this is all over Reddit. Believe me, this is what the audiophiles this is the parroted advice. Parroted.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so somebody has said it, and then somebody else reads it, and then they read it again, and they read it again, and they're like, well, it must be true. I read it enough. And then they start saying it, even though they have no idea why or what's going on or what's but it's everybody knows, and whenever somebody starts with that, everybody knows that you should listen to two-channel music.
Sure.
Through
We've literally seen those words verbatim.
It says it right there.
That's
two
right.
speakers, therefore two channels, right? That's it. Not on this podcast. On this podcast, we do not believe that. AV Gadgets, where I am the editor-in-chief, I have a Do-I crossover tower speakers, and it addresses this exactly. Mm-hmm. The idea here is that people think that you should be the tower speakers don't need to be crossed over because they're quote-unquote full range, or that if you're listening to two-channel music, you should only be listening to those two channels because that's the way it works. This is not the way it works. Bass is different. Bass is different than directed sound. So the higher sounds come directly towards you. The further away the speaker is from you, the less volume you get. With subwoofers, you never get directed sound. All that bass is not direct. It does not come directly to the subwoofer to your ears because the wavelengths are too long. And it bounces around the room before it gets to you. Therefore, if you are listening to anything with bass, which includes music, full stop.
Yes, sound.
Then
yes.
It is going to be bouncing around the room before it gets to you. You want to have a speaker that is optimized for how it's going to interact with your room to create that bass that is not your tower speakers or your front speakers or whatever speakers you have, your two-channel speakers. It is the subwoofer. So you're going to cross over your main speakers. If you want to listen in two-channel mode, subwoofers are part of those two channels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay?
you, Lance, have sussed out exactly the way that we've always thought about it, and we would not do this 2 speakers only, no subwoofers approach to music listening. We would absolutely still keep our speakers set to small. We would have bass management applied, and we would have a pair or more of subwoofers playing. We wouldn't just go down to a single subwoofer in this case, because the whole point of having the dual or more subwoofers is about how they interact with the room, not how they're just literally playing back the original signals. So, I mean, a lot of this just came from the original idea of, if you just look at the signal and there's 2 full range signals and there's no dedicated low frequency effects channel in 2.0 music signals, then the intuition is, well, then don't I just want a pair of speakers and nothing else playing those 2 full range signals, and I'm not doing anything else to the, I'm not manipulating the signal in any other way. This is part of this. I want the purity, right? I want the purity of that sound.
Purity.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, all of that actually kind of would work if you didn't have a room, right?
if you were outside.
Listening outside, and you and your speakers are both suspended 55 feet above the ground, and your speakers were completely capable of playing the entire audible frequency range at full volume, then that would work. But as soon as we come into a room, the way bass is produced is almost entirely dependent on the interaction between the bass producing thing, whatever that might be, and the room, and your listening position within that room. So, yeah, you've come to the exact same conclusion as we have. We have never agreed with the advice of playing 2 speakers full range and not utilizing subwoofers or bass management whatsoever. You and we are correct, and that advice, which is absolutely out there, and we cannot blame you one iota for having come across and been like, that just seems to be what everybody says when it comes to listening to 2-channel music. Yeah, absolutely, we've seen that too. It is the common advice, but it is incorrect in our opinion. So there we are.
Yes, and the reverse argument that you're going to hear from people is, well, it was recorded in a room, so therefore you just need the main speakers to reproduce that sound, just the same way that it was recorded in that room from those 2. No, what you're recreating is also the room in which it was recorded in, or the way it was recorded.
Been captured in the recording, yeah.
So that's all part of the recording. So what you don't need is your room to affect the sounds of that room, which is what will happen if you do not include your subwoofer. So you need accurate reproduction. I just had a conversation with somebody this weekend. I went to a going away party for somebody who's moving on to Florida because their wife is a teacher, and this is not a good place for teachers right now. So they were on their way out, and he was talking about his old blah, blah, blah speakers that he used to have in his garage with this old head unit, blah, blah, blah. He's never been able to find the same thing again.
Yeah.
Well, yes. I said to him, what you're trying to your problem is all the other speakers that you are getting now, all the other equipment that you're getting now is better. He's like, well, not better because it doesn't sound as good. I'm like, no. It's better because it's more accurate. Your old stuff was inaccurate. You like the inaccuracies. And recreating those inaccuracies can't be done with your current with your new equipment. You just have to know what the inaccuracies are. Because I don't know what those are. I said, I didn't know. Exactly. And that's why you want accuracy in your speakers. You want your speakers to be accurate so that you can recreate anything. Okay? He had speakers that were in EQ. And what you will have if you just use 2 channels is your room EQing in some way the bass as it comes out. And you need to make sure that that doesn't happen so that you get what the original recording has on it. All right. I don't know if this is lastly, his display is an LG C1 OLED. While he was watching Doom Part 1, the sandworm scene became so dark that he couldn't see anything. He rewound the scene, and the image was brighter with plenty of detail noticeable in the shadows. He made sure to turn off any eco power saving features, any AI features, anything else that seemed like it might be might auto dim the image. So can we offer any insight about what happened? I'm trying to I feel like we have talked about this before.
Yeah, and this is a bit of a revisit.
Yeah, which is fine. By the way, we've already talked about this.
This is one I don't mind reiterating at all because it comes up.
The thing to remember about TV manufacturers is that they're not making TVs for you. They're making TVs for people.
This is a very specific thing to do with OLEDs.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to let Rob answer that. I'm going to go to the bathroom.
Okay, so this is nothing you can be blamed for. And going back to this applied to the C9, C10, or CX is how they labeled it, and C1 models. They all worked the same way, which is that they did have, it was like, all to do with trying to reduce image retention, trying to make sure there was no OLED burn-in. They put in a setting, a couple of settings, that auto-dim the image, and unfortunately even do so when the overall image on screen is already dimmed to begin with and doesn't really need to be dimmed any further to reduce the chance of burn-in or image retention. But it was just kind of a global thing where if there's a static image, doesn't matter whether that static image is or bright or dark, or just like the overall average light output of the scene remains constant for quite a while, it just begins to dim the image. And this isn't something that you can change in the normally available user settings. You can only change it by venturing into the service menu. So I already went through this exact scenario in a previous episode. I'll have a link in the show notes directly to that part of that previous episode of AVRant. But it involves getting a service remote, which is under $10. So this isn't some huge amount of money that you have to spend, and it's readily available on Amazon. So for under $10, you get the service menu remote. The instructions are there in that part of the show for you have to actually enter a code with that service menu remote. And then there are two things in the LG OLEDs in the service menu. I want to warn, even though I warned in that previous version, and you'll hear it there, I'm going to say it again because it's super important. Don't go messing around in the service menu with settings that you don't know what they are. You can actually permanently damage your TV in the service menu, which is why it's not something that you can just readily access from the user controls. But there are two things, and the exact locations are explained in that previous video. TPC, which stands for Temporal Peak Luminance, and GSR, which has a hilarious name, stands for Global Sticky Reduction. Those are on by default in the service menu, and they are responsible for this automatic dimming of the image whenever you have a scene that is prolonged, that has a average light output level that remains constant for any length of time, even if it's dim and not really necessary. The temporal peak luminance is the entire scene thing. That's the most common one, where if you turn it off, it'll fix this issue. The global sticky reduction is like logo detection, like your CNN logo that's there. There's the user menu one, which is local sticky reduction, so it only dims that part of the image. The global sticky reduction, as you might guess, it means if there's a static logo, it dims the entire image, and that is also on by default in the service menu, and you can turn it off in the service menu. So once you have done that, this will resolve the issue. It is something that lots of people have run into, and this is the only way to fix it. There's also a written guide over at Tom's Guide. Nothing to do with our Tom. That's a website just called Tom's Guide, but they've written up the instructions as well. So I'll have that link too.
All right. Infinite Gary. Gary recently had a professional calibrator come to his place to calibrate all of his TVs and his projector. From past experience, Gary knows for certain that he prefers the way movies look when peak white is calibrated strictly to the 100 nit standard for SDR, even though most calibrators target 120 nits or higher, as that tends to be more pleasing to most clients. On one of his OLEDs, sticking to the 100 nit target resulted in the OLED pixel brightness slider being set to 27 out of 100, which is quite a bit lower than any of the present picture modes, even filmmaker mode and ISF expert dark mode. He does indeed like the way it looks for movies, but when he's watching an MLB game that was being played at night under the stadium lights, the image didn't look right to him, or at least it didn't remind him of seeing the game being played at night in real life.
Yes.
He wound up raising the OLED pixel brightness to 41, and he increased the color setting from 50 to 60. These were just temporary changes that he put back afterwards, but while he was watching that particular game, he found it more pleasing and thought the image looked closer to a real-life experience. Could we explain why that was so, given how good movies look and how consistent all of his displays look? After this professional calibrator was done, he doesn't have any doubts about the accuracy of the calibration. He's confident the image with pixel brightness at the 27 and colors at the 50 was accurate to the signal, but in this case, accurate didn't mean pleasing and it didn't mean realistic. So why is that? I mean, 1,000 reasons, but the two big ones that shoot off in my mind is what cameras were they using at the time?
Yep.
You know, how did they set when they were filming
the exposure of those
there was a
cameras?
lot of things that they or not even that, but just like, I mean, it doesn't like it just goes straight from the camera to your freaking house. It goes through a whole slew of editing things and everything else, and they could have had any number of settings that they thought would look good on most TVs.
Yep.
And you have yours set to exactly the way you like it, which is by your own admission, not how even a professional calibrator would normally calibrate it.
Although because it is strictly very accurate to the signal. Yep.
But, you know, just like when you hear music that's mixed for, bad headphones or bad speakers or cars, you know, and no dynamic range and everything compressed all to heck, you're like, oh, this sounds great in my car, and then you take it into your home theater, like, this sounds like garbage. That, I mean, not everything is mixed to be perfectly accurate, and this is the case here.
Well, I mean, the simplest way to think of this is imagine you're outside, you take a photograph, you're able to view that photograph instantly, and you look at the photograph versus real life, and you're like, well, in the photograph, everything's darker than it is in real life. Well, your photo was slightly underexposed. Or you look at your photograph and you're like, oh, I can see details in the clouds in real life, but in the photograph, it's just solid white in the photograph. Oh, okay, your photograph was slightly overexposed. That doesn't mean that the way you were viewing the photograph was inaccurate to what the photograph captured. It means that the photograph was not exposed to look like real life. And that's the same thing. Whatever cameras they were using for that particular MLB game at that studio on that night, they were not exposed to look like real life. They were exposed to fit whatever parameters they were doing for that television broadcast. So your TV was showing you in its calibrated mode exactly what the signal was saying to do. It's just that the camera wasn't exposed to look like real life. You change some of the settings on your TV and it looks a little bit more like real life, but now it isn't exactly what the signal said to do anymore. That's totally fine. You're absolutely allowed to do that with your TV. If you're like, hey, for this particular game, I just like the way it looks when I change these settings a little bit, absolutely go ahead and do that. And it was just the way the camera was exposed.
Yeah, and if you've got a Pixel like I do, it's going to look way brighter because
there you
they have
go.
like a night mode that like it looks amazing as far as I'm concerned. I'm like, I can see way more in this picture than I can in real life.
Than you can in real life, yeah.
I took a bunch of pictures from when we were in Turkey at night, and it was people were like, "Oh my God, this picture's amazing." I'm like, well, clearly I'm a great photographer. Michael's in the process of buying a new house. He's finally going to be able to dedicate an enclosed room to being a home theater. He's very excited. While the room is enclosed, it's not a perfect rectangle. It's not far off, but one corner where the doors is sliced off at an angle, and there's a small jut-in on the wall with the window. Overall, according to the listed dimensions by the seller, the room is roughly 2,500 cubic feet in air volume when the doors are closed, so it seems to fit in the medium-sized room category. So we're looking at it here. So jut in, I guess. The window juts in or the little corner juts out, depending on how you look at it.
Sure, yeah.
And then the one of the corners, is that a diagonal or it must be a diagonal.
Yeah, there's double doors that are coming in this room, and that's on a angle on that particular corner where those double doors are. So I mean, it's not wildly off being a rectangle. No. It's not some crazy irregular shape, but it's not a perfect rectangle.
Michael's intention is to use dual subwoofers, and he's ready to go through Rob's 12-step guide. You're not going to need to, but let's go. He already owns one HSU VTF3 Mark V. By all accounts, that is a larger sub with more output capability than he really needs in this new room, so he doesn't think he wants to just add a second one of those. Also, the VTF3 Mark V does not have a fully variable phase knob, which you probably not need, but it only has a 0 to 180 polarity switch, so if he's going to do Rob's 12-step guide, he'd like to have fully variable phase control. Somebody's looking for a side grade, downgrade, side-ish, downish, grade-ish. He's also a bit partial to getting SVS's app. He really likes the idea of being able to make adjustments from his seats, which he'll do once and then never do again. Also, ideally, the subs would have a smaller footprint and take up a bit less space in the room.
Fair.
Finally, a reason to actually buy another subwoofer.
Yeah, because that VTF3 Mark V is a big sub.
It's a big one.
It's a big sub.
It's a big one. So what do we think he should do? Should he keep his VTF3 Mark V and add an equivalent sub from the SVS's lineup, even though it's probably overkill? What would be the closest sub strictly in terms of performance? Or should he sell his VTF Mark III and get 2 brand new subs? If so, which model? Does he need to go ported? Or would a physically smaller sealed model be able to get the job done? He would really like to finally fully experience full pressurization down to 20 hertz. He doesn't want to live with what ifs. What should he get? Okay, so there's a lot of stuff you could do, and all of it is okay. First of all, if you said, I'm going to keep this sub and I'm going to pair it with something else, you would get a linear sub that can reach down to 20 hertz and call it a day. That would be it. I would not care which sub it was, ported, sealed, whatever.
Because if you get the one that's appropriate for your room, your VTF3 Mark V can exceed that.
Yes.
Which is fine.
It's
totally fine.
It's fine. So if you said, I'm going to sell this because I want to have the variable phase control in the app, is a silly reason to sell things.
Okay, physically smaller.
But just physically smaller footprint, which I think is the best reason to do this. I 100% agree. This is not a humongous room, and you don't want it to be dominated by massive subwoofers that really aren't needed in this space.
No.
So if you wanted to sell it and get 2 smaller ones, I mean, obviously I'm going to say cylinder subs. I'm going to say the PC2000s, which is still overkill for this room, almost certainly. They will crush it, but it will be very good.
And also, if you were to say get a single cylinder and keep your VTF3 Mark V, also totally fine.
Totally good.
You know, like just purely price-wise, that might make sense. Because if you're like, okay, I've got a bit of a budget, I've just moved house, I actually have a little bit less money than I thought I would, then it's like whatever money you recoup from selling the VTF3 Mark V might not cover like the second subwoofer if you're buying 2 brand new ones. So we have no problem with you keeping your VTF3 for price reasons. No problem.
So this idea, though, that you want to have the variable phase knob and you want to have the app so you can make adjustments from your seat because you're going to go through Rob's 12-step thing because your room is not a perfect rectangle. Let me just save you some time and energy right now. Okay, the reality is I think that if you went through this 12-step thing with the variable phase knob and the whole 9 yards, you'd end up with it's close enough to a rectangle that it works.
Yeah, like
without
if you
having to do all that stuff.
This is some assumption that you can place the subwoofers fairly optimally.
Yes.
So, midpoints of opposing walls, which I think is probably doable in your case. Probably the 2 side walls will work just fine in here. Barring that, maybe diagonally opposite corners, which isn't quite as optimal, but still usually gives you good results without even really having to mess with the phase knob whatsoever. So yeah, chances are you probably don't have to mess with the phase a whole bunch, but regardless, he's going to get a second sub of some sort anyway. Right. And the second sub is, because of physical size reasons, not going to be another VTF3 Mark V. So if we're just adding another sub, so he asked, is there an SVS sub that is essentially the equivalent output and extension wise of the VTF3 Mark V? That would be the PB3000. The PB3000's output and extension are almost identical to the VTF3 Mark V. It costs more at $1,600, so it costs more than a VTF3 Mark V, and it isn't really physically any smaller, so there isn't a lot of incentive to do that, and you don't need 2 subwoofers in this room size with that kind of output and extension. So for all those reasons, it isn't what I would recommend, but if you are just looking for what's the equivalent in SVS's lineup, the PB3000 is really, really close performance-wise. So he was like, okay, could it go considerably smaller, get a couple of sealed subs? There, I would probably point you to a pair of SB2000 Pros. It's $1,700 for 2 of those right now. And if you're just going strictly by the metrics, right, the CEA 2010 measurements, and you're going to have 2 of them and maybe corner load them, maybe not, well, you wouldn't quite hit full reference volume at 20 hertz with 2 of those. In a 2,500 cubic foot. Well, I know. So, but that's just the objective truth. You wouldn't quite hit full reference volume at 20 hertz. Now, look, 25 hertz and above, you would. So you could absolutely do a pair of SB2000 Pros in this room. I think it would be very, very satisfying, and that would make sense. Now, if you want to get 2 at least home reference volume, right? Which we're now saying is 6 decibels below cinema reference volume. Could you get to home reference volume with a couple of sealed subs? Yeah, a couple of SB3000s would do that for you. Now, yeah, it's $2,100 for a pair of those, so they're getting kind of spendy here. But, a couple of SB3000s could get you to the home reference volume right down at 20 hertz, and that's with sealed subs. Interestingly, over at RSL, their second version, the Mark II of the Subwoofer 10S, it's almost got the exact same performance as SB3000, right? Now, this is ported versus sealed, but the subwoofer, the Subwoofer 10S Mark II is like about the same physical size. It just uses a smaller driver, but it's ported instead. And those are only $450 each. So if you're like, yeah, SB3000s is what I wanted to aim for, definitely consider a couple of Subwoofer 10Ss for $900 for the pair of them, because they're really, really close in size and performance to a pair of SB3000s priced at $2,100. And RSL's speakers do have a fully variable phase knob on them, so you're not giving that up. They don't have the app, but they do have a fully variable phase knob. So then if you're like, okay, home reference volume not good enough for me, I want cinema reference volume, well then a pair of PB1000 Pros, the ported ones, PB1000 Pros, $1,500 for that pair, that would do it. Or Monoprice's Monolith M10 V2, they're at $650 right now, so a little bit less expensive for a pair of those. Those would get you there. They'd get you to at least minimum cinema reference volume over 110 decibels, right down at 20 hertz. And then if you just want to go nuts, you're like, yeah, I've got to have over 115 decibels at 20 hertz in here. Well, then you're stepping up to the larger Subwoofer in RSL's lineup, the 12S. That can get you $800 each. Those are a steal. $1,600, same price as a single PB3000. You can get a pair of the Subwoofer 12S. However, they are huge. They are physically huge. They're physically even larger than your VTF3 Mark V. So from that standpoint, probably not what I would recommend. But yeah, you could be looking at Monolith M12 V2s, $900 each, or a pair of PB 2000 Pros or PC 2000 Pros, $2,100 for a pair, or $1,100 each. So if you want the smaller footprint, I want 115 dB at 20 hertz, and I just want to leave nothing on the table, I would probably get a pair of PC 2000 Pros, or keep your VTF3 and add a PC 2000 Pro to it. That's my final answer.
Yeah. Again, and if you really do want to go through this 12-step thing, which I don't think you'll need to do, I think you can throw them in opposing corners or midpoint of opposing walls.
Yeah.
And just run Odyssey and call it good. Then if you really want to go through it, all you need is variable phase on one. You don't need it on both. Right. Yeah. So just the fact that you're buying one more subwoofer is all you really
think need. You should start by getting a single PC 2000 Pro cylinder, and I think you'll be done.
Right. And then you can talk to your significant other or whomever else is involved in this whole process. And when you have that, you get the cylinder on one side and the big square box on the other. You're like, I can either keep it the way it is, or I can get another cylinder and sell that big square box.
Yep.
And save some real estate. What's your opinion? That sort of thing. He asked, what would happen if you paired this VTF3 Mark V with a sealed sub, like the HSU subs? Like all HSU subs, the VTF3 can be put in sealed mode. So what would that be the thing to do? Is it different if it's paired with, say, an SB2000 Pro rather than the SB3000? This whole sealed versus ported subs, like they sound different somehow. I mean, it's all about the roll off at the end, really.
That's right.
And the footprint and a bunch of other things. But as far as sound goes, it's bass. It just sounds like, if it's linear bass, it's linear bass. It's not like it sounds like different linear bass. Right. It's linear bass. It just sounds the same. So it would make no difference. I would leave my VTF3 Mark V in whatever mode it's in right now. That does fine. And I would get, if you got one of these other ones, then you would.
Yeah, the only slight thing I would say is, like I mentioned, if your goal is to get to full reference volume right down to 20 hertz, the SB2000 Pro wouldn't quite get there in this room. So you're at that point getting a little bit back to like, okay, one of these subs is the weak link in the chain. SB3000s, you can basically just go ahead and do that, no problem. SB2000 Pros, your VTF3 Mark V is going to be doing considerably more output at 20 hertz than the SB2000 Pro would, so it might be a little bit. However, that's way, way, way down low, where your ears are really bad at hearing it, so I wouldn't really have many qualms doing that either.
He plans to sit about 7 to 8 feet eyes to screen. He's thinking that puts him in the 85-inch TV range for an ideal screen size, but a budget does exist, apparently not for subs. And he's hoping for something more in the $2,000 to $2,500 price range. That could get him a 77-inch OLED, but not an 83-inch right now. So it's the eternal question, 77-inch OLED or 85-inch LCD, or a 77-inch OLED and move it closer.
That is an option. Put it on a TV stand. Your seats don't change their location, but the TV, it just happens to be about a foot closer, but it's on a TV stand. You don't really notice that it looks weird at all.
Yeah, to give some context, he's very happy with his TCL 6 Series LCD TV from years back. It will be going in the living room, and he's never lived with an OLED, so maybe he'd never know what he's missing. If he were to go with the 85-inch LCD in his desired price range, what would we point to? You're going to get an OLED. You're not going to go through this whole thing and not get an OLED. It'd be my preference. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, okay. And I've said this thousands of times on this podcast, and I'll probably say it thousands more. I have learned through bitter experience that if you get right up to the edge of what you want and you back off just a half step to save some money, you are going to spend the rest of your life wishing you hadn't done that. Because you were right there. Yeah. You're only a couple $100, or in this case, a couple of inches from having what you wanted. Get what you wanted. And then, live with your 77-inch that's a little bit closer than maybe you would really, you can't wall mount it or you wouldn't really like it. It's like a little bit closer than you might want. Live with that until the prices come down, and then move the 77-inch into the living room and get the one you want from in here. I am telling you, you're gonna regret it. So don't get the LCD.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I want you to get the OLED if you can in any way. I mean, look, another thing. I mean, maybe we find a way to save some money on the subwoofer. We only buy one instead of two. We keep the VTF3, and some of that budget goes towards the TV. And you can afford an 83-inch. Maybe you still find a C2 that's on clearance, and it's enough with that budget savings in the subs that you can go ahead and get the 83-inch and have it all, because that would be the real answer. But look, I'm certainly not going to blame anybody who says, I just absolutely want a 85-inch television in the $2,000 to $2,500 range. What are the options that are out there? Look, there's the TCL QM8. It's a really, really nice TV. It's not like it's going to look bad in any way. The blooming on it is noticeable. You can see blooming when there's bright, small objects on a black background.
And now that Rob said it, you're really going to see it.
Well, I mean, it's just a fact. It is there. It is a really nice TV, but the blooming is present. There is no blooming on an OLED. Hisense's U8K is also typically right in that same price range, although at the moment it's not on sale at Best Buy, so it's back up to its $3,000 MSRP, but it'll come back down to $2,500 at some point in the not too distant future. I'm very confident of that. I will mention the Hisense U8K. Actually, if you want every single green check mark possible on your Xbox Series X to light up, including Dolby Vision at 120 hertz, not only 60 hertz, like the TCL QM8 will limit your Dolby Vision gaming to 60 hertz at 4K. The U8K can actually do Dolby Vision 120 hertz, VRR, variable refresh rate gaming. It's got one of those Pentonic chips from MediaTek in there. It does the Hisense U8K. That said, overall, even though the QM8 can probably use a little bit of color calibration, just the overall image, I think, looks a little bit nicer on the QM8. So that's probably the way I would lean, unless you just absolutely have to have Dolby Vision at 120 hertz when you're gaming. The other one that's in this price range, Sony's X90L, going for $2,500 right now for the 85-inch size. What you will really love if you're a Sony fan is that they do a really good job of, we keep the blooming to a minimum and we keep all the shadow detail in the just above black areas. They do that really, really well. The thing is, to have that really nice shadow detail, they just go ahead and raise the black level. They don't worry about trying to make black as inky black as it can possibly be. They go ahead and raise that black level. Blacks turn a little bit dark gray, but all the shadow detail is there. So what do you prefer more? If you're watching in a well-lit room where absolute inky black isn't going to matter that much anyway, you might prefer the slightly better shadow detail that the X90L gives you. My feeling, though, is the way I've always looked at it. I'm like, I can't get past black not being inky black. And so it's just tough for me to be on board with that, but I do know where it makes sense. So those would be your three options, and you can consider them. But you know what? Forget all of it. Go get an OLED.
Yes, do that. Tony has a Denon X4700H receiver. Wait a second, we just talked about this receiver. It has 9 amplifiers built in with processed 11 speaker channels. He's been running a 7.2.2 configuration using just the receiver's built-in amps. He's using a pair of front heights, but he already has a pair of in-ceiling speakers in this room, and they're basically where top middle should be. So he's thinking he'd like to try expanding to the full 7.2.4 configuration. That means he'd need at minimum 2 channels of external amplification. What should he get? He liked something budget-friendly. First step, do a 5.2.4 configuration and see if this is even going to be worth it.
Okay.
It's just a matter of swapping some wires.
You would take, you would disconnect your surround back speakers.
Yes.
And you would now correct the height to, which you will set to being top middles. You'd connect those to your in-ceiling speakers. Your surround back speakers will not be playing for the time being. And yeah, you can give that a try without purchasing anything. Just a little bit of rewiring on the back of every receiver.
Yes. That's step 1. And then that step 2 is decide that you didn't really need the surround back speakers to begin with.
That's where Tom ends. But I will say you can absolutely get a very nice little 2-channel amplifier for not a ton of money. So my first and top recommendation would be go to grab a Fosse TDA 7498E. You can get them at Amazon for $70. $70. So that's not too bad. I don't feel too bad about basically anyone doing that just on a flyer because I don't feel like that's going to financially burden anybody too much. Now, if you're just like, I don't want a little Class D amplifier, even though it's really good and has plenty of watts and will sound absolutely fine, especially powering your top middle speakers that couldn't possibly be any less picky. If you want a class,
to you, really.
That's right. If you want a Class AB amplifier, Audio Source, again available at Amazon, their Amp 100, nice choice. It's $150 for 50 watts a channel of Class AB, but not going to break the bank too badly with that thing. We do have Monolith's new M2100X. The only reason I would say this is if you're like, I've got to have XLR inputs on the back of my amp, even though you absolutely do not need them connected to an AV receiver. But if you're like looking towards the future or whatever, and you're like, I demand that I have it, then that's $400 for essentially 100 watts per channel. I think they conservatively rate it at 90 watts per channel, but I don't mind recommending the M2100X if you really got to have those XLR inputs. But honestly, my true recommendation, $70 for the Fosse amplifier, and you can go ahead and connect your top middle speakers.
Very exciting. He has zero experience with ever using an external amplifier, so he would very much appreciate a for dummies level explanation of exactly what gets plugged into what and how to get it all working. How can we help him out? So this is from my memory. I'm not going to look at Rob's notes. I'm scrolling back up. So my memory, the first thing that you have pre-outs, right? So you attach the pre-outs for the speakers that you want to power with your receiver. So
on the back of your Denon, there's the height 2 pre-outs. Yes. Those is what you're going to use.
So in most, the last time I looked this up, which has been a hot minute, you could either power your fronts or you could power whatever are the furthest behind you and highest speakers, basically.
That's right. And in your case, it will be the top middles. Yeah.
So in your case, it'd be the top middles. For me, it was also the top middles, actually, now that I think about it, because I had front heights and top middles. But if you only had whatever, 7 speakers or in floor level ones, then it would be your surround backs. But you don't. That's not what you have. So you would plug in your top middles, your pre-outs, your surround back 2s in this case.
And that's just a pair of RCA cables that go from the height 2 pre-outs on the Denon to the, of course, RCA inputs on any of the amplifiers that we suggested.
Right. And then you would, if that amplifier for whatever reason decided that the one that you got had a volume control, you would turn that probably all the way up, or maybe a little bit off from all the way up if you notice any sort of audible hiss when you don't have anything playing through it.
What I would say is, as soon as you've connected the preamplifier outputs from the Denon receiver to your amplifier of choice, turn on the Denon, turn on the new amplifier, turn the master volume on the Denon up to 0 dB, turn the volume dial on any of these amplifiers that we suggested all the way as high as it goes, then go stand beneath your top middle speakers. Nothing is playing. You just have these volume knobs turned up. Nothing is playing. And if you're like, I can hear a little bit of a hiss coming from those top middle speakers, go back to the new external amplifier. From your seat.
From your seat. Yes.
Yeah, or anywhere that you might be listening from in the room, and go back to the external amplifier and turn down the volume knob. Now, if you were to get that monolith amplifier, it doesn't have a volume knob. That won't be something that you're doing. But if you got the audio source or you got the Fosse, those do have their own volume knobs. So start with it turned all the way up, and chances are, to avoid any audible hiss whatsoever, you'll back that volume knob on the external amp down just a little bit, not a lot, just a little bit is all it takes, and you'll probably do that. And that's you would do that step.
Yes. So once you've done that, and again, it's important to note that this hiss that you may be listening for, you can probably put your ear right next to the speaker and you're going to hear something anyway.
Sure.
That's not important. What's important is whether or not you can hear it from any given seat, though that might be important to you. So now that you've done that, you will go into the speaker selection or speaker setup menu, and you're looking for amp assign, and you're only gonna have a couple options. So you put the amp assign so that it's the appropriate channels. So this speaker B pre-out will be then the amp assigned to middles, top middles, and then you run on.
No, the height 2 will go to the top middles.
Sorry. Yeah. To top middles, and then run Odyssey again, and that's pretty much it.
Yep. So your amp assign, you'll set to 11.1. That's going to be fairly self-explanatory because you're using 11 speakers. You're going to set your floor to 5 channels with surround backs, your heights to 4 channels. You're going to set the layout of those heights to front heights and top middles. You already figured that out. And the pre-out is already at the default. Height 2 is what's going to be feeding those top middle speakers. So you'll just connect your RCA cables, connect speaker wire, of course, from the binding posts of your new external amp to those top middle speakers. You're going to do that little bit of volume knob adjustment perhaps on the external amplifier if it has one. Run Odyssey and you're good to go. I did want to mention the Denons have a great setup wizard, and do not be afraid to use it. They'll actually walk you through all these connections step by step on screen, and other than they won't tell you to do the little volume knob adjustment on the external amp, other than that one step, the setup wizard is great. So if you go into the setup menu of your Denon and go right down to the bottom of that setup menu to where it says Setup Assistant and Begin Setup, you'll go through the wizard and it can help you through this if what we said didn't make sense. The last thing I'll just say is not on the Fosse amplifier, but on both the audio source and the monolith that I mentioned, they have the ability to power on and power off with your AV receiver in response to a trigger. So a trigger is just a mono 3.5 millimeter cable. That's what you use for the trigger. In fact, I think the monolith even comes with one in the box, but there's just a little trigger in and out. So you would have it going into the external amp, and then on the Denon, there's 2 trigger outputs, trigger 1 and trigger 2. So just go ahead and plug the 3.5 millimeter cable into trigger 1, and then it's under the general settings in the setup that you can activate trigger 1, and you just say, hey, when main zone turns on, send a trigger signal. When main zone turns off, send a trigger signal. And now that audio source or that monolith amplifier will power on and power off along with your AV receiver.
Right, or you can do what I do, which is just turn it on and leave it on.
Get the Fosse and leave it on 100% of the time. It's a Class D efficient amplifier, and it's absolutely fine to leave the Fosse on all the time.
Right. Dan says he would consider himself an audiophile and a videophile. Over the years, he's taken a chance on many different pieces of gear, including esoteric brands and cables. Some of them have been rabbit holes, chasing the next best thing and wanting to find better. Others have, at least objectively to him, proven their worth when listened to. He has continued to listen to our podcast for many years and initially, emotionally, disagreed with things we've said, sometimes feeling judged as a self-professed audiophile. We were judging you. We're judging ourselves. So it's okay. There's a lot of judgment going around. I think I started the podcast off talking about how much we love to judge people. So you just judged yourself. Do you feel superior to yourself now? There you go.
There you go.
But as time has passed, he's been finding a lot of truth in what we say and found himself reacting to the decisions of other audiophiles as being misguided now. On the other hand, we can all agree that if you simply love the look of something, the material that a speaker cabinet is made out of, a paint job, a particular industrial design, what have you, none of us has any beef with someone lusting after a piece of gear simply because they want it. Actual performance metrics aside, correct? Abso-frickin-lutely.
It's your money. It's your enjoyment. If you're like, dude, I just love the way that thing looks. I love these tube amplifiers. I don't care how they sound. I freaking love them, and it gives me joy every time I power them on.
Yes.
More power to you.
Yes, absolutely. I love it. But having listened to us for so long, would it be fair to say that we're offering advice when we're offering advice, we tend to lean towards what we consider to be the best available performance for the price. If he's correct about that, then he'd like to pose a hypothetical. I think we asked the questions as asked. We answered the questions as asked. Sorry, and that is most people want to know what's the best thing to buy, or if I buy this, will it make a difference? So they're asking performance-based questions. They're not usually often at. So we can just look back to the last question where or maybe 2 questions ago, where I said, if it were me, I would get the 2 smaller footprint subwoofers because I feel like that's better for the space. Okay. And whereas that might not be the most cost efficient or may not look the best, the performance would be there. And then the aesthetic concern was also part of that. So I at least, and I think Rob does as well, will take into consideration the more than just the raw performance, which I have a problem with people who are just like raw performance.
I would fully admit, like my default is to try and go for bang for buck. That is definitely my default. But if the question is asked in a different way, then I'll respond in a different way than that. But I will fully admit that's my default for sure.
Yes. Okay, so he says, this is a hypothetical. Suppose budget isn't a concern, limitless funds, and with that limitless budget, we have constructed our ideal home theater room. What gear populates that home theater with price being no object? What do Tom and Rob think are the pinnacle in speaker, subwoofer, processing, amplification, and cable wire performance to achieve sonic mastery today? We can throw our choice for the display in there as well if we like, and more importantly to Dan, the particular choices themselves and more importantly to Dan than the particular choices, is why. He wants to better understand our thinking and to know why we've chosen those exact pieces of gear. So let's have it. As far as this is the only I didn't write down anything. Okay. poor Rob's got all these links and everything else, but many of my links are going to be very similar. So if it were me. And is there another question after this?
Yeah, same thing, but for music.
For music. So this is for movies. For me, obviously, I am going to go with the top of the line OLED. I mean, as far as video is concerned, I would almost certainly, and as much as I love looking at my own gear and stuff like that, I am of the opinion that I would like to have a system that was a little bit more aesthetically pleasing and invisible. So I would like to have the false wall, the whole thing, but the OLED would be the projection source, if it will, and with built into the wall.
Cost no object, you can go ahead and get the 97-inch.
Yes, it would be it was just too big for my room, but I would have a different room as well.
That's right.
Obviously fully treated. I don't think I would go with a theme. I don't like theme type things. And as far as speakers are concerned, I very much feel like it's very easy to spend a lot of money on speakers that don't sound better than not spending a lot of money on speakers.
Absolutely.
So for me, I would probably, and this is just from my own personal experience, I would be looking towards something that had the best, widest dispersion, so that you're getting that really good, every seat is a good seat home theater design, rather than looking for something that was like the absolute pinnacle of accuracy and beryllium tweeters and all this other stuff. I would be looking towards speakers that were more, and that to me is often RBH. RBH has speakers that are very good for everything, which is how I think speakers should be, but they are also, as you spend more on the RBH speaker, you get more. So I don't know if I would go...
With what RBH is offering these days, that's not cheap. We are going to be making use of that budget. It's not like we're skimping out here on the price or anything.
But I would still be, I'm going to be honest with you, the only speaker that's in the room I would have would be the 2 or maybe 4 cylinder subs from SVS, because I am never going to give up my love of cylinder subs, and I do want to see them. So I would, that would be the big concession I would make, would be that. So cabling, HDMI cable, I might consider the THX ones that just came out. I think I'd be okay with that. But certainly anything that's got the certification on it. As far as speaker cable, I mean, the SVS speaker cable is very good to look at. I'm not planning on seeing any of it, so I'd probably go with Blue Jeans.
Okay.
Which is ugly, but guaranteed to work. And
right.
that would be all the rest of my cabling, like all of it. So
and what would you do for a AV receiver or processor and amplification?
Oh, and we'll certainly turn off, right? Just, okay. I mean, I don't think I would ever use all that, but we're going with cost is no object.
Cost is no object, yeah.
And I feel like that's got the ability to be reconfigured and to upgraded and everything else that it needs to be outside of the HDMI connections. But as far as like, we decided to add these channels that are now on the floor. I'm like, okay, the Trinoff could probably get an upgrade that does that. So I would go with that. And amplification wise, it's either going to be ATI or something made by ATI.
Okay.
Just to make sure that that I've got rock solid amplification forever. So that would be
yeah, I mean, honestly, Tom and I are considerably more similar than different, so not going to be huge differences here. I'll say, you know what, cost no object. I'm going to go ahead and get Perlissen's S-Series speakers. I'm going to go for those. I love the engineering behind these speakers. Do I actually genuinely feel like it's completely necessary to go to this price point to get performance that I would never be able to hear the difference? I mean, honestly, probably not, but at the same time, I think Perlissen's price points are surprisingly not as high as they could charge. They could charge more for their speakers than they do. I think they're really fairly reasonable. So look, I've enjoyed Beryllium tweeters for a long, long time. I completely... I don't think there's anything about the design of these speakers that I disagree with. And since this is cost no object and, I've built the room that I want, I'm going for something like a 13-foot viewing distance to my primary seats. I'd love to have 3 rows of seats, 1 row of seat that's closer than that, 1 row of seats that's farther. So this is a fairly large room. I want speakers with nice high output capability, and the Perlissens match that. So that's what I'm going for as far as speakers, cost no object. For subwoofers, I'm going over to JTR. I'm getting some captivators. I'm going to go ahead and do it. Again, it's probably actually a bit of overkill for whatever I need, but I'm going for a pretty large room here. I've built the room the way I want it, so I can visually hide these behind fabric walls and stuff like that. I don't care about the size and the looks. Mm-hmm. And, they have some now that aren't quite so enormously deep in that. They have other cabinet shapes for those Captivator subs. So that's what I'm going for there. Probably 4 of them. And then, you know what? I'm getting a Trinov as well. That's just easy. Altitude 32. You just really can't beat it. And I'm going for a large room where I am probably going to have more than 15 speakers in there. And then I'm going ATI. I'm going right to their signature series amplifiers. I want those 300 watts per channel because I got a big room. Why the heck not? And then I'm sticking with Blue Jeans cable as well. I'm gonna get broadcast quality cables. Why the heck not? Never any question about those. And then for the display, I'm gonna get a Samsung The Wall. Why wouldn't I? I'm gonna sit 13 feet away. I'm gonna get their 146-inch 4K The Wall display, micro LED, 4K 120. So sure, $220,000, but price no object. I'm gonna go ahead and do that. Then I just wanted to mention, for power protection, price no object, I'm going to get Surge X. I'm going to get the one that is non-self-sacrificial, can just take zaps for years and years and years and keep on trucking. So why the heck not? Not that they're ridiculously expensive anyway, so I'm perfectly happy doing that. And then, I'm going to have a control system, so I'm just going to go Crestron. Whatever you want to do, you can do with a Crestron system. If I've got all the money in the world, I'm going to go with a Crestron system. So there you go.
All right, Dan is also very curious to hear what we put together for a strictly music listening system, and again, why those particular components other than more than anything. Once again, no budget restrictions, and we have already built our ideal listening room, but this time for just a single listener who is critically listening to music, what changes for this scenario? So I thought a little bit more about this, and there's 2 ways I could go with speakers. One, I would like electrostatics. And like true electrostatic speakers are essentially headphones that are all the way across the room from you, but they sound insanely different than anything you've ever experienced before. I would like those to be in this room.
Okay.
There's a lot of them out there. Intersound is the ones I've heard, but there's other ones that are out there that are very expensive, $20, $30, $40, $50,000.
We have those Martin Logan Neoliths now, so why the heck not? Price no object.
Right. I would also want to have something that was for more than one person. I don't care what your question is. And for that, I would look at something that was more akin to a line array. And to get that sort of experience in this 2-channel listening room. I would also, as far as gear goes, and this is going to be my own personal troll, I would have a big stack, like the wall or whatever that's up there, have like cutouts or shelves or whatever for different types of amplification. So I'd have like tube amps, like two big 2 amps, 2 big solid state, whatever, Corel, like Class AB, Class A amps, all this other stuff.
Class D amplifiers.
Yeah, the whole
Why
thing.
not? Okay.
And I would have a remote that would allow me to, press a button and switch the amplification, like with the light, the amplification that was being used there would be a light over it, and that would shine, and then you'd be able to listen to it, and then you'd be able to switch a button, and it would quickly switch to a different amplification method, blah blah, blah, and the light would go out on the one amplifier and go on the other amplifier, and blah blah blah. All that's a ruse. Those amplifiers aren't connected to anything. They're just sitting there. And then I would have the actual amplification, which would be whatever it actually needs. Like a monolith amp or an ATI amp or a or something else, right? Or just powered by a receiver.
You got all the money.
Yeah, and it's just allowing people to sit there and press the button and switch and like do some listening tests and all this other stuff. And I would have like cables laying on the floor with cable elevators and the whole thing, so that you could switch between, I've got these different sources and then a couple of record players, or the record players I probably wouldn't do because you can't quickly switch between them, so it would make no point. But it would be neat to be able to do all that and have people sit there and psychologically trick themselves into thinking they hear a difference, and then
very nice.
Yeah.
Very nice.
I also would have, like, behind the false wall, that would certainly have to be in here behind all these things, because I have to hide the acoustic treatments at the very least, would be a pair of, like, bookshelf speakers that were, like, really good, like the Perlissons maybe, like you're talking about, right? Yeah. But behind, these massive speakers, and then be able to covertly switch to those in a couple. And there would, of course, often also be properly placed subwoofers in this space. That's a given. But I would have a couple of bookshelf speakers behind the curtain, so to speak, that I could switch to, and then people would be like, "Oh my God, those speakers sound so big and amazing." I'm like, "Yeah, that's not what's playing. It's these other ones."
That's right.
Yeah, and then, that sort of
Tom
thing.
wants to use his money to troll people. I enjoy.
I did. This
go.
is the one I actually, because you sent me the question, and this is the one I actually thought about. I'm like, I am going to build the biggest troll room in the history of troll rooms. I might not even hook up the other, like, line array speakers. They just might sit there. And then have like a pair of bookshelf speakers behind them going.
Nothing ever actually changes. It's just all there.
It's all lights.
To trick your
It's just lights
system.
that light up on the different amplifiers and the different cables and the different.
Wonderful.
It would just be. It's just a troll. It's just all it is.
That's right. So this is an honest answer. In real life, even if I had all the money, I don't think I would have a separate room for music listening. What I set up in my theater is going to be absolutely fantastic. I mean, just to go a little bit on the why these choices. Basically, this is stuff that I know and am very confident is like whatever might be playing. Whatever might be called upon, even if it exceeds 115 decibel levels, it is capable of just doing it and not distorting it, and that's the reason I would choose these products. The why would I choose these particular products? Because they basically do the best job I am currently aware of completely getting out of the way. Right? So whatever is happening with the signal, these are playing it. They're playing it accurately. They're not imbuing any of their own character to it. And that's my reason for going this. And they have headroom to spare. I'm not going to stop at exactly what I need, because you know what? If some signal comes in and calls for 130 dB, I don't want anything interrupting that. Just, that's what we're going to do. Price, no object. But when it comes to music listening, I can conceive of maybe I would have a little bit smaller room. and a little bit more, because he talks about like a single listener, right? Critical listening, single listener. That means I might change my choice of speakers, because if I'm going single listener, I'm less concerned about particularly vertical dispersion because I don't have 3 tiers of seats anymore.
Right.
I'm actually going to go with, you know what, speakers I already own, just more of them, Ascend Acoustics Sierra RAL speakers, because vertical dispersion, they are limited. They are absolutely limited, and I wouldn't necessarily go with them for a 3-tiered seating setup, but for a single critical listener, I don't know of any tweeters that sound better than these. I don't know of a mid-range that's more neutral than these. And while they can't play quite as loud as the per listens, if my room is a little bit smaller from my dedicated music listening, then these are the speakers I'm going to choose. I would also, assuming the room is a little bit smaller and I don't need JTR captivators, I'm going to go with SVS PC4000 cylinder subs, just like Tom was doing in his theater. Love those subwoofers, love the placement option they would give in a slightly smaller room. So that's what I would go with in there. But I'm still going to do immersive audio in my music listening system because there's Atmos music. I don't want to not have a system to play that. So I'm keeping the same amplification and processing. I'm going to go whole hog, even in the perhaps slightly smaller, more focused room. So yeah, that's what I do. The only other thing I wanted to mention is I think I might consider a different setup for gaming. Again, price no object. I can have another room that's dedicated to gaming. And one thing there, like as great as that micro LED is from Samsung, I want the one that can check all the green check boxes, including my Dolby Vision at 120 hertz. So I'm going to go ahead and get, you know what? There's a gaming setup. I'm going to have it be smaller. I'm going to go for the 77-inch G3. And they're like, why would you go so small? Well, that's the largest size that has the new micro lens array in it. That you can't get any bigger and still have the micro lens array in a G3. And the G3 does all the, you know, Dolby Vision 120 hertz, VRR, G-Sync, ATI's FreeSync, everything. Checks every single green box. So that's going to be my display. That means I've got a smaller setup. I'm going to go for a Denon AVR A1H in here. I don't need Trinov anymore. This room is clearly small enough I don't need more than 15 speakers. So I'm going for a Denon A1H, and that has like all the best HDMI processing, which, funnily enough, the Trinov doesn't have yet. We're still waiting on all the newest HDMI processing to be added to Trinovs, but the A1H has it. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then, in a surprising move, I'm going to have a different set of speakers, because now, in a gaming setup, I'm envisioning, if I've got people over, we're gaming, some people might like stand up while they're playing. Some people might move around while they're playing. There could be a little bit more physical movement going on. I want super even dispersion vertically and horizontally, and I'm going to get some KEF R series, meta, and those are going to be my speakers in this little bit smaller gaming dedicated setup. So those are my reasons, and those are my picks.
All right, who do we have left, Rob?
Paul is the only one on the list, and he'll be first up next week.
All right, Paul. We'll see you next week. I just want to thank our listeners of the week. We're going to thank our 134 patrons over at patreon.com. Thank you very much.
Yes, patreon.com/AVRant podcast if you'd like to sign up to make an automatic monthly donation. So big thanks to our 134 patrons over there.
I want to thank Rohan for giving me permission to use his photos on AV Catches, as well as Rohan again, Mark and Dan for sending us notes of gratitude. Thank you guys.
Yeah, thanks Rohan for giving that permission. We know he listened because he got back to us even while he was away. So thank you for that. And Rohan, Mark, and Dan, thank you for your notes of gratitude and encouragement. They're definitely appreciated. And a big, big thank you to everybody who continues to listen and send in your questions.
If you want to get your question answered, all you have to do is ask. You ask by emailing us at question@avrant.com. For AVRant, I'm Tom Andrew.
And I'm Rob H. Now go out and listen to something.
Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.